Slowpoke! Slowpoke, go! Attack! Slowpoke, ah! What is slowing Slowpoke down? Why is this hippo-like Pokemon so slow? Hippos are actually terrifyingly fast for their size. Well, what if I told you that the thing that is slowing Slowpoke down is everything imaginable? Slowpoke is one of the slowest Pokemon out there. They are so lazy, almost adorably so. And not much more can be said of their evolved form, Slowbro, in terms of speed either. But there has to be some reason for this. It's not just slow in speed, but slow in the brain too. Even as Slowbro, this Pokemon is a dunce. But then why is Slowking, an alternate evolution of Slowpoke, one of the most intelligent Pokemon? As the Pokedex entry in Diamond and Pearl says for Slowking, they have the intelligence comparable to that of award-winning scientists. How can this be? And all the while, he isn't much faster physically. Well, here's a theory. What's giving them that glazed look in their eyes? Those eyes that never focus on anything, always spacing out, looking off into the distance.
The far, far distance where nothing can bother their wandering mind.
What's going on through their heads? Well, everything. Slowpokes are omniscient, or at least are aware of far more than humans could ever comprehend. They are psychic type after all. At this point in their evolution, they may already be more aware and smarter than we could ever imagine. They're just too busy having the trip of a lifetime to utilize that intelligence. They can't do anything with all that power because of all of the stress of being omniscient. It causes them to slow down and barely be able to do anything aside from the occasional psychic power. Their brains are so busy with everything that according to another Pokedex entry, it takes 5 seconds to feel pain when under attack. It remains in a daze, and whether asleep or awake, there is little difference. Because even when asleep, their dreams are taking them through an omniscient thrill ride throughout the universe. But then a Shelder bites its tail. Speaking of which, this is the ugliest Shelder I have ever seen. Though usually dim-witted, it seems to become inspired if the Shelder on its tail bites down. Inspired, huh? Inspired and now more aware of their immediate surroundings. While still in an omniscient hangover, Slowbro is much better at everything, especially intelligence, because rather than being high on awareness, it has been kicked back into reality. And if the Shelder happens to bite down on a Slowpoke's head, the Slowpoke evolves into Slowking, who is intelligent enough to talk, and has the intelligence of great scientists. Where do they suddenly get this intelligence? Why, from their omniscience, of course. But now, they are significantly more in the real world, and no longer on a big trip. So now they can use their knowledge gained from their omniscience to benefit the world. It has an incredible intellect and intuition. Whatever the situation, it remains calm and collected. Because when you've gone through the enlightenment of seeing everything, there is no need for anxiety. You can just be your smart self without worry. It undertakes research every day to solve the mysteries of the world. However, it apparently forgets everything if the Shelder on its head comes off. It's the same case with Slowbro. If the Shelder comes off, it's just the normal Slowpoke again. Slowpoke and its evolutions have the brain power to be omniscient, but then the constant pain and flow of toxins in its body from the Shelder bite kicks it into gear. And when those toxins directly entered Slowpoke's head, it unlocked an extraordinary power. The power of not being omniscient. The power of not being high 24/7. Now fully aware of the physical world around him, Slowking is ready to show us the true power of intelligence that he gained from seeing everything. You've probably heard the first part of this theory, but the second may surprise you. It's like the intro to a BuzzFeed article. Oh, Wobbuffet, you're so silly with your ridiculously high endurance and your inability to attack other Pokemon directly. All Wobbuffets can do is counterattack. Wobbuffet's Pokedex entry reads, "It hates light and shock. If attacked, it inflates its body to pump up its counter-strike." In Sapphire it reads, "Wobbuffet does nothing but endure attacks. It won't attack on its own. However, it won't endure an attack on its tail. When that happens, the Pokemon will try and take the foe down with it using Destiny Bond." In Diamond and Pearl, it desperately tries to keep its black tail hidden. It is said to be proof that the tail hides a secret. This tail has eyes, and the body only has lines representing eyes. It has a high endurance unless you attack its tail, because its tail is actually the Wobbuffet. The body is only a decoy that it inflates, like a punching bag. And also like a punching bag, it comes back harder and harder depending on how hard you hit it. So that's the secret. Wobbuffets are only their tail, but that's just what they want you to think their secret is. Most people stop there, as this is a common theory. But now let's go a step further, into a deeper realm of theory. Let's look at Wynot, the previous evolution of Wobbuffet. Note that Wynot's tail is also actually its main body, but its tail this time only has one eye. Now let's look at its Pokedex entries. Wynot can always be seen with a big, happy smile on its face. Look at its tail to determine if it's angry. It tends to move in a pack. Individuals squash against one another to toughen their spirits. It tends to move in a pack with others. They cluster in a tight group to sleep in a cave. Wobbuffet's Pokedex entries never really mentioned grouping together, but most of Wynot's do. Perhaps this is because when they evolve into a Wobbuffet, they leave the pack to journey out into the wild and continue increasing their power of endurance, to eventually endure all things and take over the world, or seek enlightenment, or find friends, or something. Now here's where it gets crazy. I propose the idea that Wobbuffet is actually the third evolution, and Wynot is the second. But then where does Wynot come from? Well, that's unknown. No, really. Unknown. Unknown, the Pokemon right before Wobbuffet in the Pokedex, but that's only one extra little bit of evidence to point towards this theory. The big chunks of evidence come with speculation. First, unknowns never venture out into the real world. They are terrified of the place. They are even more terrified of being alone. Unknowns are powerless by themselves, and thus they are always close together in large groups. Sound familiar? It tends to move in a pack. They cluster in a tight group to sleep in a cave. Wynot is pretty weak. They cram themselves together in caves and ram themselves together to raise their endurance, train for venturing outside. And doesn't it look like it could have been an unknown that decided to grow an inflatable body to use as a decoy, to protect them from the world that they're terrified of? They are too cowardly to attack on their own, so they endure. Unknowns have reality-altering abilities, so they could easily make themselves an inflatable decoy body if they really wanted to. With this decoy, this shield, they could finally venture out into the world and be able to protect itself and protect the other unknown. But as just a little Wynot, it's just still not quite ready to do so just yet. And so, why not remain in a big group to train and prepare themselves? Unknown are just little black wingdings with a single eye, just like Wynot's tail. And when it eventually evolves, it gains a second eye and becomes a powerful Wobbuffet. Wobbuffet holds a secret. The secret of the unknown. It protects them just as it protects itself. Wobbuffet can learn Mirror Coat, Safeguard, and Destiny Bond, all moves that require some sort of strange mystical power to use. Perhaps a modified form of the only move Unknown can learn, Hidden Power. Both Unknown and Wobbuffet are Psychic type, and even when Wobbuffet is just countering a physical move, it starts glowing, like he's still using some form of psychic energy, the power of the unknown. And this is also why Wobbuffets are so competitive against each other. If 2 or more Wobbuffet meet, they will turn competitive and try to outdo the other's endurance. However, they may try to see which one can endure the longest without food. They each know the secret they hold, and they each want to prove the power of endurance they have, to show which of them can defend the secret of the unknown better. Similar to Why-Nots, Unown hold themselves in secret, and keep their hidden power mostly to themselves. They protect their secret to protect themselves, much like how Wobbuffets feel about their tails. They protect it above all else, and if you attack it, only then will the Wobbuffet show you its wrath, and it will take its secret down with it, and with you, with Destiny Bond. No one learns the secret of its tail. No one learns the secret of the unknown and lives. This, however, is just a theory, a Pokemon theory, a Pokemyth. Gotta learn them all. And there are some holes, sure, and let's cover some of those now. How come Why-Nots and Wobbuffets have a sex but Unowns don't? Well, Unowns already have reality-bending powers, so they can be whatever sex they want. Why can't Why-Not and Wobbuffet use hidden power? Because they're trying to not be compared to Unowns as much as they can. If they started going around using the same move that Unowns do, some people would get kinda suspicious. Then why do Why-Nots come from an egg when you breed 2 Wobbuffets? Who's to say a Why-Not embryo isn't just an unknown? To better hide its secret, it stays in its unknown form until it hatches. I mean, really, that's the counter to basically every argument against this theory. Unown don't have to follow the same rules that the rest of Pokemon do, because the very existence of Unown is mostly unknown. And they literally bend reality to their whim. As we see in the Pokemon movie Rise of Darkrai, Unowns are literally holding together the fabric of space and time. So if they just decided, hey, I'm gonna go exist in the real world now, they could easily do that. It is said to have emerged from an egg in a place where there was nothing, then shaped the world. This Pokemon was born before the world even existed. It is described in mythology as the Pokemon that shaped the universe with its 1,000 arms. 1,000 arms? But Arceus is equine, not a super squid. No arms, no hands, no tentacles or anything, just legs. Looking at Arceus can make one uneasy. This alien and machine-looking thing with organic and inorganic parts makes it look sorta extra-dimensional. And perhaps it is. Perhaps it appeared in this dimension to create the Pokemon universe. But it used its own arms? What? Well, what if these arms are actually the other definition of the word arms, that being short for armaments? And what if these armaments are actually unknown? And Arceus used 1,000 unknown to create the universe. Unknown have reality-altering abilities when in large groups, but what if there was no reality yet? And what if there were 1,000 of them? And next to the all-powerful Arceus? This is worthy of speculation. So after creating beings to make and defend time and space, Arceus, according to this theory, created the Unknowns to assist in creating the universe in this newfound time and space. Arceus used the Unknowns to manifest its power, and perhaps to later store it in smaller bits around the universe. That way, Arceus could access it later when it needed it. Spreading out its power amongst all the Unknowns would also make sure it doesn't accidentally destroy all of reality, because that would be a bummer. It would certainly ruin everyone's week. Let's note that when we see Dialga and Palkia fighting at the beginning of the Rise of Darkrai, every attack from these dragons sends a group of Unknown flying. This is because these two beings, which created time and space in our reality, are breaking that reality with their fight. And the hidden Unknown that are all around us, perhaps in a higher dimension, are falling out of that dimension, are falling out of their behind-the-scenes fabric of maintaining reality. Dialga and Palkia are tearing holes in that fabric of reality. Unknowns apparently keep reality in check, and as we see in the third Pokemon movie, when they are in their own dimension, they stay in their own patterns and alignments. Their shapes that they make hold this reality as we know it together. The Unknown maintain it, as that is what Arceus commanded of them. Together they created And now the Unown Preserve. The Azure Flute, the flute that is used to summon Arceus to you, makes the same sound as a large group of Unown. The radio signal the Unown create, not their cry. Perhaps the flute makes the sound of the Unown calling for Arceus' help. So, we know that they are quite connected, even in the games. What's more, if you bring your Arceus into the game Heart Gold or Soul Silver and take it to the ruins of Alph, the ruins dedicated to the Unown, there your captured Arceus will transport you to the Sinjo ruins. Cynthia is there and senses you have a powerful Pokemon. You go to the mystery stage and can only continue if the only Pokemon you have with you is Arceus. Arceus stands in the middle and you choose either Dialga, Palkia, or Giratina to acquire. Arceus then summons all of the nearby Unown, who then swirl around it and create an egg for you, and you get the Pokemon of your choice. So here, Arceus and the Unown created a new Giratina, Dialga, or Palkia for you. So now we know for certain that Arceus and the Unown work together to create things. But perhaps not just some things, but all the things. This Pokemon reality as we know it was created by Arceus through the power of the Unown, of its 1,000 arms. Similar to how many mythologies and religions teach that the creator didn't create everything, but rather created creators to work with him in creating everything. Neat. Minecraft is a game that has been explored to the ends of the world and back. So you might think that this game has nothing left to hide. In fact, it has a huge secret, right below your character's feet. Today we will be exploring one of the strangest and least explored parts of the Minecraft world, the Void. As many a Minecraft player knows, falling into the Void is a one-way ticket to losing all of your health points and inventory. But why? Why does the Void kill you? What if I told you that the Void is actually a black hole of epic proportions? To understand why I say this, we have to look at one of the strangest things ever imagined. Just to give a brief description, a black hole is a region of the universe where space is so curved and time is so compressed that nothing can come out of it. If you fall in, you are not coming back out. That certainly matches the Void. Even in creative mode with your ability to fly, it is impossible to recover from a fall into the pixelated darkness. Since no light can escape from a black hole, they are, well, black. That matches the Void too. This black hole theory also explains why your player character dies from falling into the Void. Typically, falling shouldn't kill you, it's the landing impact that does. Using the equations from general relativity, scientists can show that falling into a black hole would kill you, however, and in a very strange way. Since gravity strengthens at an ever-increasing rate as you fall into a black hole, your feet and legs start to be pulled with more force than your head and upper body. Eventually, the difference in force would literally snap you in half, then again, and again, and again, as you fell further and further. The first snap might not be fatal, but you would cease to exist soon after. This is very analogous to what happens as you fall into the Void. Successive chunks of your health vanish until the game over screen appears. One of the other well-known features of the Void is its continuous cloud of particles coming from it. Now this seems to contradict the earlier point about nothing escaping from a black hole, however, it doesn't. What I didn't mention earlier was that almost nothing can escape from a black hole, with one exception: incredibly tiny particles that spontaneously appear in polar opposite pairs before disappearing. Thanks to the laws of quantum mechanics, these tiny particles have a slight chance of suddenly moving faster than the speed of light and exiting the black hole in a process known as quantum tunneling. Once outside the black hole, these particles are known as Hawking radiation, named after the scientist Stephen Hawking. It is very possible that void particles are in fact Hawking radiation, since, aside from their exaggerated size, they have all of the properties of Hawking radiation. To see our final piece of evidence, we have to look at the Void in a different way. If you've ever been in a Minecraft map with no floor, you might have noticed something odd. If you go high enough, you can see either the sun or the moon below you, depending on if it's day or night. Far from a bit of programming, this is actually a fantastic example of another phenomena black holes cause: gravitational lensing. As the name suggests, this is caused by the gravity of the black hole curving space around it so much that light coming from all directions around it is bent as if looking through a lens or bouncing off of a mirror. Thus, the sun and moon you see aren't actually below you. The void is just bending their light in a way that makes it look like they are. Now, I'm sure that some of you will be questioning how the Minecraft world could possibly exist hovering just above the horizon of a black hole without being sucked in immediately. Since black holes have insanely strong gravity, right? Well, kind of. Black holes do have incredibly strong gravity at their singularities, at the very heart of the black hole. What we are looking at, however, is the horizon, where only the black hole's tidal gravity is pulling things in. Weirdly, as a black hole gets more massive, the tidal gravity at its horizon gets weaker. A good way to understand why this happens is to think of the surface of the black hole as a soap bubble. Since gravity is the curvature of space, the more curved the bubble is, the more tidal gravity it has. Now let's say we start inflating the bubble. As the bubble grows bigger in size, the surface becomes less curved, which means it has less tidal gravity. Since the horizon of the void is so big that it looks basically flat, its tidal gravity is tiny. Far too small to even pull in the bedrock floating right above it. And thus, we come to the conclusion that the void is a black hole and Minecraft is stranger than before. Just think, the next time you're falling into the void, you may be experiencing something the greatest physicists to ever live could only dream of. This weapon is so weird. Like, how does it even work? That sounds like a good topic for a video. Out of all of the weapons in the Halo universe, none are as confusing as the Needler, and we're going to find out how it works today. So to do that, we need to know all of the strange things that happen when the gun is fired. Let's create a list of all the things the gun needs to do. 1. The needles get sucked down into the gun. 2. The needles then get fired out of the weapon's muzzle. 3. The fired needles track their targets slowly. 4. When embedded in anything for a short time, the needles fragment. 5. When multiple needles enter a target, they explode. And finally, reloading the weapon is a simple flick of the wrist, which causes needles to pop out of the top of the gun. It is a very complex weapon, and to make it even more confusing, it is stated in Dr. Halsey's journal, Dr. Halsey being one of the smartest people in the Halo universe, that the Needler has completely baffled scientists, having no internal parts in its firing mechanism, rendering the weapon completely impossible to reverse engineer. So how can we, a bunch of nerds on the internet, figure out how the Needler works if people 500 years in the future can't? Well, by using our noggins. So when you think of confusing things, magnets may come to mind. Magnets can cause things to move without moving themselves, so it would make sense that the Needler utilizes magnets in its firing mechanism. Magnets can explain how the ammunition gets sucked down into the gun and track their targets, but if the needles are magnetized, they would get drawn to all sorts of metal objects, not just their targets. And when examined closely, the needles don't have enough room inside the gun to make that turn from the top of the gun to the muzzle. Magnets still could be at play, but we'll get to that later. Inside the gun, something happens that causes the needles to make this impossible turn. It's like the needles teleport. Teleporters do exist in the Halo universe, but in the Needler's official summary, it is stated that the Needler requires no reverse-engineered Forerunner technology to function. Forerunner technology includes teleporters, so the needles aren't teleporting. No, the trick of the Needler isn't magnets or teleporters, it's gas. If the needles are broken down into gas form, they would be able to make this impossible turn to exit the muzzle, and that could also explain the needle's rugged shape, as if they were just formed. Plus, pink gas and fragments are expelled as the weapon is fired and reloaded. In the first Halo game, Needler ammunition is placed as a large chunk of blamite. But it's a large chunk of the stuff, not a pack with multiple needles in it, so here's what might be happening inside the needler. The blamite chunk inside the weapon is melted down to a gas form, where it is then able to escape through multiple holes at the top of the gun. When reloading, you flick your wrist and the needles pop out of the gun. This is most likely a variation of a gyroscope, that thing inside your phone or 3DS that enables you to play motion games. When the correct motion happens, the blamite is pushed out of the gun and solidifies into sharp needle shapes. When the weapon is fired, some of the blamite is pulled down. You can see that the whole needle isn't consumed, and some of it is left poking out of the top of the gun. The blamite is then turned into a gas and is pushed towards the muzzle of the gun. How is it getting pushed, you asked? The blamite has magnetic properties. So magnets and their magnetic fields are pushing the blamite gas throughout the weapon. Thus, there would be no physical moving parts. When the blamite passes through the weapon, it is combined with some other gases. One being some gas that causes a chemical reaction with blamite after a certain amount of time, which causes the fragmentation, and with enough needles, the explosion. And the other gas would be some gas that propels the needles forward, albeit slowly. This is why the fired needles have long trails behind them. But how does the needle seek targets? This next part is where it truly baffles humans. Blamite is a very rare substance, only being on one moon in the entire galaxy. It is said to have special properties that even the elites who make the needler don't even understand. So, what is it? The blamite is able to receive information, sort of like a microchip. When the gas starts to solidify when exiting the muzzle, it passes by these prongs. These prongs then give real-time information to the blamite as it passes by them. This information being the location of the wielder's target through a scanner at the front of the gun. This theory is supported as the needles can't follow targets that are behind structures. It also explains how humans can't reverse engineer it. It's a technology that is far too advanced for humans to understand. That being a gas that is solid and can receive information from a microchip and uses magnetic fields and other chemical reactions to do a bunch of crazy stuff. It's complicated. Give humans a break. The weapon fires automatically, which means all of this is happening very fast. An interesting thing to note is that the rate of fire for the needler has been getting faster and faster in each new Halo game, going from this to this. It's like the Covenant are finding ways to speed up the needler's internal process. This same kind of process can also be used to explain how the needle rifle and the Blood of Suban work too, just with a stronger propellant in exchange for the seeking technology. Likely because that gas is passing through the front of the gun too quickly for the information to transfer through. So the needler uses a complex gas formula to operate how it does. Which is quite awesome, and completely understandable how humans just don't know how it works. I mean, I didn't even cover everything, like how can a gas receive information? That's just baffling. And again, really, this is only a theory. Does it affect how you play Halo? No, but it's fun to think about. In the dark depths of space above a hostile alien planet, one bounty hunter named Samus Aran was sent to eradicate the greatest threat the galaxy has ever faced. No, I'm not talking about the Metroids, I'm talking about the mysterious, shape-shifting parasite called X. X, the parasite. Though X vs. Samus would be very cool. In the game Metroid Fusion, we are introduced to the X Parasite, a strange life form with the ability to go practically anywhere, clump up into a protective sphere, quickly adapt to extreme cold, take over the bodies and minds of various animals, and even process electronic data. Such a bizarre species could never actually exist, could it? Amazingly, there is one life form that has shown almost all of the properties and ability of the X, and it might be in your kitchen right now. So, to get started, let's look at the first ability I mentioned. The X are able to move between areas at a high rate of speed with ease, even going through incredibly small cracks and crevices. While many animals are very flexible, all are too large and too slow to match the speed and spread we need. Plants don't readily change location most of the time, so that's obviously not it. Those eliminations leave us with 4 other kingdoms of life: fungi, protista, bacteria, and archaea. Looking at the size of the X Parasites as compared to Samus and Fusion, it's easy to see that they are humongous. Their sheer size takes bacteria and archaea out of the picture, but we're left with a question. Do fungi and protozoans even grow that large? As it turns out, they do! Meet Calvacia gigantea, more commonly known as the giant puffball. These mammoth mushrooms have been recorded growing as large as 5 feet in circumference. Of course, protozoans are no slack-offs either. One particularly large slime mold that was found just outside of Houston, Texas, measured in at 40 feet long. That's about the same length as 3 cars placed bumper to bumper. So clearly, both fungi and protozoans have potential to be the size of X. And speaking of slime molds, those are very interesting life forms. They move and grow by releasing tiny little tendrils out of cells outwards, seeking food and a better environment. That type of movement seems to fit the X quite well. The really interesting thing about slime molds, though, is that they are a gigantic group of single cells called protists, working together to act like a multicellular organism. They are a colony organism. Perhaps the X are as well. However, we can't rule out fungi yet. There are plenty of those that behave in a multicellular colony-like manner as well. So let's move on to the next characteristic: the ability to change into the defensive form known as Core X. Core X has a hard, clear shell that makes it harder to get at the softer energy-filled center. It seems strange that the shell has no color or opacity to it at all. Surely that can't be real. Except, it actually is. There is a certain type of fungi called hyaline hyphomycetes, which can basically be transparent, with only a little bit of pigmentation in the fruiting body. Check off another characteristic of the X as potentially being real. Now we have a tougher barrier to overcome. Are there any fungi or protists that can survive in extreme cold for long enough to evolve? It's here that the delicate protists fall away. No species is known to be able to withstand conditions that extreme. In fact, the 40-foot slime mold I mentioned earlier was taken out by a small rainstorm in a few days after it was found. Not very hardy indeed. Surely, you might protest, no mold can withstand cold like that either. Unfortunately, you'd be wrong. A number of studies have been done on the fungus Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which included placing it into an environment much colder than its natural environment and allowing it to evolve there. In fact, this same fungus can be frozen and reanimated by heating it back up. Clearly, at minimum, this fungus, which is also a multicellular colony-building species, fits the profile of the X very well. Still, we should investigate the rest of the characteristics of X just to make sure. What next then? Ah, yes, mind control. Many of you are probably already aware of the cordyceps fungus family. They are the parasites responsible for creating zombie ants, and are also the inspiration behind the Pokemon Parasect. There is another fungus, however, which can infect people. It can make them hallucinate, undergo sudden changes in mental state, or even develop a fatally high fever. This condition is known as cryptococcal meningitis, typically caused by the fungus Cryptococcus neoformans. Cryptococcus neoformans happens to be very closely related to Saccharomyces cerevisiae, being another colony-building multicellular fungus. The similarities are starting to get eerie. But there's one last characteristic we need to check. That characteristic is the seemingly impossible ability to process electronic data. For anything to do this, it must have a number of electrical pathways available to use as circuits. And the last I checked, mushrooms are not made of metal. So it seems to be a bust. How could a fungus that has no metal parts or even a brain channel electricity? It took a while to find this one, but incredibly there is a way for fungus to conduct electricity. It was only a few years ago that an electronically conductive composite material made partially of the fungus Candida albicans was discovered. The secret ingredient, it turns out, was carbon nanotubes. This probably seems like a huge stretch to say that a fungus somehow evolved with tons of carbon nanotubes around, since those are a man-made structure. But in fact, nature's been producing carbon nanotubes for billions of years, in the soot from fires and smoke from lava. Going back to Metroid 2, the only game that takes place on SR388, which is the homeland of the X Parasite, we find that the underground caverns contain just what we need: lava, or in this case magma, and a lot of it. There's only one more major loose end here, which is the size of the X Parasite. If you remember this video about Dr. Mario and his viruses, you might recall me mentioning something about microbes evolving larger in space. The reasoning behind the X is similar here. The planet SR388 has lower gravity and a lower pressure atmosphere because it's so much smaller than the Earth. With less gravity and air pressure to fight, the X would have been able to undergo a form of island gigantism. Only with the entire planet instead of a small island. This also explains why Samus is unable to remove her suit there, as opposed to Zebes, where she could, but I digress. From our discoveries here, it seems like the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or a similar species of fungus, could indeed evolve in the caverns of SR388. Evolve into the deadly X Parasite we see in Metroid Fusion. Near the beginning of this video, I mentioned that the X precursor might actually be in your kitchen. That's because it is an important tool for everyone who wants to bake. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is best known as yeast. As many Pokemon fans know, the Pokemon world is a vast one, and within its vastness comes unexplained phenomenons. Many of these are of the spooky variety, and where there are mysteries, there is plenty of fan speculation. This is a collection of 10 short and sweet, spooky Pokemon theories. But first, real quick, Pokemon fans, Sun and Moon is right around the corner. How will you adventure for hours on end in the Alola region without more energy? I bring you the answer. This video's sponsor, Catalyst Gaming Mints. Each tin contains more energy than a 6-pack of energy drinks, and contains Siberian Eleuthero root, making the energy last longer without the jitters and crashes. It even helps with memory retention so you can practice your battle strategies and remember them. And more than any of the other sponsors, I can super personally recommend these two. I've used these to replace my daily intake of energy drinks, which are filled to the brim with sugar and calories, neither of which are in Catalyst Gaming Mints. So for me, these are a bit of a lifesaver and a money saver. More energy for less cost. Maybe these can help you too. Links to their website are in the description, and use the coupon code Gnoggin for a discount during checkout. And now that we're all energized, let's get to it. Number 1, Ghost Girl. In the Hoenn remakes, one of the Elite Four, Phoebe, is a ghost trainer. You may have already seen the few frames where these two mysterious ghost girls appear, but only briefly. Even this camera angle is from the point of view of one of them. Curiously, these girls' models in the game show them holding a doll, and 2 of Phoebe's Pokemon are Bayonets, a Pokemon whose Pokedex entries state that it was once a doll that was abandoned, and now holds a grudge against its owner. It seeks them out to curse them. These girls' dolls may have become these Bayonets, who later found their owners and cursed them in the afterlife. At least Phoebe has the ability to talk to ghosts, so they hang out with her. Number 2, a horde of faceless men. At one point in X and Y, you enter a haunted house where you find a creepy old man standing there by himself. He tells you a very creepy story in which he is rummaging through the darkness before finding a faint light which allows him to see a man huddled in the corner, who yells, "Stay back!" He then asks, "Please, can't you help me?" To which the huddled man yells, "I'm not talking to you! Don't you see them behind you? A horde of faceless men!" and that ends his tale. Horde is a choice word here, as Pokemon X and Y is also the game that introduced Pokemon hordes, meaning battles where you fight 5 Pokemon at once. So 5 is a horde. Also, during this story, the camera is snaking its way down as if you are being watched. Perhaps one of the legendary Pokemon in X and Y is watching you. Zygarde, as it does watch over the world. And it does have these 5 large tendrils around its back, and in the dark it does look like these could be a horde of faceless men. Ghosts of a sort. Number 3, ghost Pokemon make their trainers insane. Looking at mediums, the Hex Maniacs, and the Channelers, we can see and hear that they have indeed gone bonkers. Seeing things that aren't there, thinking red is a ghost, and making animal sounds. Being that many ghost Pokemon are mischievous, it could be that all of their tricks are slowly driving these trainers insane. I mean, Haunter even took Ash's soul out of his body at one point. Imagine what some less friendly Pokemon could do with that sort of power. And considering there are Pokemon like Shedinja, which can absorb your spirit, and the Litwick evolutionary line, which literally burns away at souls, it's not hard to see how this could eat away at the minds of ghost trainers. Or at least, the weaker-minded ones. Most ghost trainers that still have their composure are more stern, calm, and collected, and have a deep bond with their ghosts. So unless you have a strong mind, ghost Pokemon may in fact drive you insane. Number 4, is Ghastly a dead cloister? Look at Shelder, so innocent, it evolves into the rather menacing looking cloister, and at some point that cloister dies. But because of how strong it is defensively, it holds on to all the life it can, and not ready to perish, it becomes a Ghastly. Its shell is lost, but its head remains. Remembering its time sticking its tongue out as a Shelder, it learns the move Lick. But eventually, even the head falls away, but the gas that replaced the shell now becomes the entire body, and it forms hands, and later, another full body. All these spikes on Haunter and Gengar are made to represent the spikes on Cloyster's previous shell. And, after all, these 5 Pokemon are right next to each other in the Pokedex. Number 5, Clefable and Gengar. Rhydon may have been the first Pokemon designed by the Pokemon designers, but Clefable and Gengar were also very early designs. And their bodies are shaped similarly, almost eerily so. But now, put Clefable in direct light and its 2D shadow has a much more Gengar-y shape. Gengar is, after all, the shadow Pokemon. Perhaps Gengar is the shadow of none other than Clefable, a bright pink fairy thing to counter this dark evil ghost. Number 6, the Frostlass. In Sinnoh, while heading up Route 217, you come across a lone house. In it, you find a woman by herself, sitting at the table, and she whispers, "A person. A rare sight. Thank you for visiting. A gift." And she gives you a spell tag, an item that boosts the power of ghost-type Pokemon. If you leave the house and come back, the woman is gone. And come to think of it, trainers in the area talk about hauntings nearby. Being that this house is in a very snowed-in area, it's possible that this was no woman at all, but a Frostlass in disguise. A female-only ghost ice-type Pokemon that appears dressed in a kimono. This Frostlass could have frozen you solid and put you on display, as many do. Number 7, Pokeball Possession. As we clearly see in the Pokemon anime, Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar are all able to possess objects and move them around, but in the end, they are still Pokemon, and thus are able to be captured by a Pokeball. In a sense, the Pokeball is possessing the Pokemon. But now reverse the roles and have a ghost Pokemon possess a Pokeball. Only now, because it's a Pokeball, the Pokemon possessing it cannot escape. It is trapped eternally. And those Haunter eyes look quite a lot like Voltorb. Number 8, Shuppet and Rotom. Rotom is an electric ghost that likes to possess objects, mainly appliances, but possession nonetheless. The Reaper Cloth is a powerful object for ghost-type Pokemon. It even evolves Dusclops into Dusknoir. And now, if you were to drape a Reaper Cloth over Rotom, well, it looks like a Shuppet, does it not? Shuppet is also only slightly taller and heavier than Rotom, explained by the weight and dangling of the cloth. Shuppet can also learn quite the number of electric moves, which is uncommon for ghost Pokemon. Shuppet and Rotom also share mischievous personality traits in the anime. This relation is quite uncanny. Number 9, Parasect is a zombie. Paras is a bug grass type Pokemon that has these little mushrooms growing on its back. It is shown in the anime that they do not always have these mushrooms and they can be taken off. Also note that Paras has pupils. Its evolved form, Parasect, has 2 key differences. The most obvious is that the mushroom is now most of its body mass, and its eyes have rolled back into its head. This mushroom may be the actual Pokemon, a parasite. Much like Cordyceps, a family of mushroom that takes over the minds of various insects. Parasect is a zombie, much like the zombies from The Last of Us. And number 10, Interdimensional Gengar. Somewhere on the other side, a being is doing all it can to press itself into our reality. As it begins to break through, all it can manage is a gaseous form, a gaseous face. But as time goes on and it gains more power, it manages to bring its hands into our perception of existence. And as it uses the power of the dreams it eats, it claws away at the barriers between worlds and pushes its whole body into ours. Now its form is complete. A Gengar. But it's not quite done yet, as when its true power is unleashed in its mega form, it has finally done it. Its hands and feet are now fully planted into our reality. And there is no going back. You know, until the Mega Evolution wears off.
But what about all the DLC characters? They don't have their amiibos out yet.
Dang it. Amiibo! Or amiibos. Is the plural of amiibo amiibos, or is it just amiibo? English is messed up enough as it is. Anyway, these little toys have created quite the cultural phenomenon. What with scalpers, collectors, and people who just sort of want some of them. Certain amiibos have also become ultra rare and have skyrocketed in price. Though they've come down in recent months, thankfully. We have communities of people working together to obtain these things. But why? What are these? What caused this all to happen? And was this Nintendo's plan from the beginning? None. To fully understand what Amiibo are and why this has happened, we should travel into the past and look at the history of the medium. Amiibo were not the first figures or toys to interact with video games by any means. It dates back decades. You could even say that Rob was one, though the first major predecessor to the Amiibo were UB Funkies. These little toys, you'd buy them in little packs, and each one you'd put onto a hub that was connected via metal plates, as opposed to wirelessly, and putting them on would unlock whatever character you have, as well as a world, and you would explore it. It was a computer game introduced in 2007. Such primitive technology, ugh. Later would come Skylanders, a Spyro reboot by Activision. And this is what really got the ball rolling. Every figure would unlock a character or a level in the game. It was massively successful among children. Getting a toy and a game unlock at the same time? Mind-boggling. And it would do this wirelessly with better technology, an NFC chip within the figure. NFC meaning near-field communication. It would allow you to place the figures on a surface with the NFC reader, which definitely smoothed out the process. One of the major drawbacks to Skylanders, though, is that most of the characters were new and original. And it's kind of sad that that's a bad thing in this case, but I suppose it's how you look at it. Because, for example, the next big figurine collecting video game would be Disney Infinity, taking the same formula as Skylanders, but the characters were all your favorite Disney characters. And it would later introduce Marvel characters, and then Star Wars characters. Though I suppose they are Disney characters now. Whoa. Being that now the figurines' characters had a history to them, they were not only going into the hands of more children who just wanted more characters in their game, but also to children who enjoyed that history. And now there is a greater appeal to adults who collect Disney things. Cool figures of their favorite characters too. and in a cute and smooth art style as well. Plenty of people who don't even have the game would buy some of these figures just because they liked the character. And that is the same phenomenon we see affecting Amiibos too. It wasn't too long after that Nintendo announced their Amiibo line, and this time, instead of original-to-your-game characters, or Disney characters in a video game, now it's well-known video game characters in a video game. Perfectly pinpointing the target audience. Plus, Amiibos would work across mini-games, initially Smash Bros. And Mario Kart, but soon more and more games would add this Amiibo integration. Some debated against the usefulness of Amiibo, however, stating that what they did was kinda lame, and even today, most Amiibo integration is sorta tacked on to a game, not necessary. All the Amiibo will do is unlock an optional costume or give you a small bonus. But the real draw to Amiibo was with Smash Brothers. In Super Smash Bros., they would initially act as level 1 fighters that you would train all the way up to level 50, and they would learn how you fought, and act accordingly. Though some debated how much they actually learn how to fight, and how much was just merely pre-programmed. But I have a whole video on that debate right here, and I'll have a link to it at the end of the video as well. But useful or not, Amiibo had a whole other factor involved in their value. The fact that they were Nintendo figurines. Nintendo fans love Nintendo characters, and a lot of Nintendo characters never get a lot of merchandise. Shulk, Captain Falcon, Wii Fit Trainer, Ness, Lucas, Olimar, Fire Emblem characters, and more. A lot of these characters don't have any official merchandise, or at least haven't had any in recent enough years to be a factor. And that is factor number 1 as to why certain Amiibo are rare and very valuable. Because the characters they are don't have a lot of official merchandise about them. So this not only draws the attention of people wanting them for Smash, or for collectors fulfilling a collection, but it also draws the attention of people who are just fans of these characters. For instance, I have one friend who is a huge fan of Star Fox 64. It's one of his favorite games. So he really wanted a Star Fox amiibo, despite not owning anything from Nintendo since the GameCube. He just wanted a cool Fox figurine for his shelf. And that's just one example of many. Easily the biggest factor involved in a certain amiibo's value is how popular the character is. From an accountant's perspective, it makes perfect sense to make a lot more amiibo of popular characters. That's why if you go down to your Walmart or Best Buy today, they will have like 30 stinking Marios, and 20 Pikachus, and like 40 Links. I know mine do at least. Mario, Luigi, Yoshi, Link, Peach, Toon Link. These are all huge characters, so it makes sense to print them like crazy. And then there's characters like Wii Fit Trainer and Shulk. Both not so popular, so they don't make as many of them. But the lesser popular characters can't be that much less popular since they're all sold out. Right? Well, yes and no. From the typical market's perspective, most people will not want a Dark Pit amiibo. Heck, that's why my Best Buy has like 20 Dark Pit amiibos in stock, and they will never be sold. They've been sitting there for months. I've never seen that stock get smaller. I bought one, not because I like Dark Pit, no, I hate his edgy guts. I only bought one to complete the Smash set. So from Nintendo's perspective, it's all a gamble. They need to figure out the demand and make sure there is an appropriate supply. Which is a lot harder than you'd think. They've got a lot of money invested into these figures, so they don't want to make more than what will sell, but they also want as many available to sell as possible. And admittedly, they've failed a bit on that end. But either way, reason number 2 is the difficulty of supply and demand balancing. But maybe this scarcity was all done on purpose by Nintendo, Maybe it's all a conspiracy. More on that later. For now, let's talk about another reason. We can't just blame Nintendo for this amiibo phenomenon. There are also scalpers. Scalpers is the term used for people who buy up the entire stock of something to resell online for a higher price. Seeing the value and popularity of amiibo, this became commonplace. Scalpers would try to figure out which characters would have a low supply but higher demand, and would buy up those amiibo in slogs. Sometimes hundreds of them, buying at $15 each and selling for $50. desperate collectors, fans, and parents of said fans would cave in and buy them for these higher prices, which only encouraged more scalpers to arise, seeing how profitable it really is. As later waves of Amiibo were announced, the pre-orders would sell out in minutes, which scared everyone that wanted them. Scalpers were always on the lookout and would buy them in bulk, seconds after pre-orders became available. Thankfully, this problem wouldn't keep going. Nintendo later talked to many retailers and set limits to how many Amiibo someone could buy, setting the limit to 1 of each Amiibo per customer. Some scalpers would still just go from store to store to store, buying 1 of each one, but that amount of inconvenience definitely slowed down the amount of scalping. Also, as a side note, this waste of space and oxygen. Username Mario to Plumber. He decided he was going to buy 100 Rosalina Amiibo and claimed to be buying hundreds more, specifically to destroy them so nobody else could have them. What a stupid spaz honky. But he's not the only douche nozzle affecting the availability of Amiibo. An entire truck full of them, and other games too, was stolen in the UK. Never to be found. And here in California, we had port strikes. Okay, I guess that actually doesn't make them bad people. I mean, admittedly, there was a bit of an issue with the company that owned all the ports and they're not bad people. The strikes happened at a really inconvenient time for Amiibo collectors. I mean, it wasn't like it was only affecting Amiibos. There was lots of other food and merchandise being affected by the port strikes as well. Millions upon millions of dollars were held back and even lost as a result of these strikes. But we're talking about Amiibos here. Let's focus on that. These port strikes lasted weeks, and those port strikes were right in the middle of an Amiibo shipment from Asia to North America, which only scared people even more. I want my Amiibos! So those are some other reasons involved. Stupid people and port strikes. All of these combine to create the great Amiibo sparsity. Well, at least of certain Amiibo, of the less popular and the mainstream characters that still have a very dedicated, though smaller fanbase around them. I'll have to come up with a catchier name for that. Gaswalokal Pumviskistisvdabat. Perfect. Entire subreddits and petitions were created to fight the scalper menace, and to help people get the Amiibos they all wanted. It's beautiful, really. A bunch of Nintendo fans coming together and doing something productive. Buying toys.
They're not toys!
Well, that's debatable. See, they're in like a weird middle ground between toys, figurines, and video game DLC. It's weird.
They're not toys.
Okay. But now, what if all of this was planned? This sparsity was all a conspiracy by Nintendo. They have done this in the past, after all. They've even said they purposefully keep the supply of some of their games low so that they stay higher in price. Ever notice how Nintendo games never seem to drop in price when the games are still new? And even when they do, it's much slower than usual games. The biggest factor into why that is that Nintendo keeps the supply of their games low. So could they be applying the same strategy to Amiibo? Oh, definitely. And perhaps now more than ever. They likely are limiting pre-orders to smaller amounts as well, to give the illusion of a much smaller supply than it actually is. Which changes how people act about Amiibo. People who want a certain number of them, or a certain set of them, originally may have wanted to just pick up 1 or 2 now and then, I'll get the rest later. But now, there's the fear that if they don't get them now, they won't get them at all. So people buy them as soon as they can, before they drop in price. And they start pre-ordering them, or going into the stores on release day, even if they were never the type of person to do that for anything else before. There's a first time for anything, and if they don't get the Amiibo now, they may never have a chance to again. They actually will. Nintendo just doesn't want them to know that. It changes people from basic consumers into a collector mindset, and there's a whole video about that specifically over on the Idea channel. This could easily have been Nintendo's plan all along, and what they've said about the scarcity of Amiibos kind of backs this up. They've been giving very mixed signals about if Amiibo will get second printings or not. Initially saying no, Amiibo will not be printed again, then later saying yes, we'll reprint some of them, but not all of them. And this only increased the number of people buying them as soon as they could. And store-exclusive amiibo didn't make this any easier. In fact, Nintendo may have known that these amiibo would have this frenzy surrounding them, and so they sold the exclusivity to these retailers. All in all, it is a very successful marketing campaign. People coming together and helping each other buy amiibos, and buying amiibos for themselves, and talking about buying amiibos, and buying amiibos, purchasing amiibos, getting amiibos, collecting amiibos, getting amiibos as soon as they can before they sell out. Really, it does all of Nintendo's advertising for them. Genius. Punches! One of humans' few methods of attack without the use of a tool. We humans don't have claws or teeth or anything of the sort, so when under attack we have few options other than flailing our limbs about wildly. But for most of us, even this doesn't help too much, with the exception of those of us trained in combat and those of us with a higher strength stat. Some humans are able to put out a lot of power, like we see here. MMA legend Bass Rutten punches hard enough to cause some serious damage, including rupturing a spleen. A punch at 1,300 pounds of force. But can he defeat giant monsters with nothing more than a single punch? Can he cause fire to burst from his hands? Didn't think so. One Punch Man. One Punch Man is an interesting series. From webcomic to manga to anime, it just keeps getting wackier. It all circles around the story of Saitama, a superhero whose super strength allows him to defeat most adversaries in a single punch. And not even a punch at full force. He's shattered golems into rubble and splattered beings into gore. He's even punched the rain away. How does that even work? But what truly is the extent of his power? What if One Punch Man punched you in the face once? Well, at this point the anime, the webcomic, and the manga have yet to finish, so something could happen in the future that debunks everything I'm about to say, but as of right now, let's figure out what would happen if Saitama punched you in the face at full force. Initially, going into this video, I was going to research everything, including how strong One Punch Man is defensively. But for the sake of simplicity, and the sake of this video not turning into multiple hours long, let's just look at his offensive power. We know Saitama can survive in outer space by holding his breath, and that he can be struck by lightning, which frequently is 5 times hotter than the surface of the sun, and not even flinch. So there is no question about Saitama's endurance, but what would happen if he punched you in the face with a serious punch at all of his might? Well, you would die. Obviously. But how would you die? A lot. You would be deader than anything has been dead before. But what's the science behind all that? Let's look into it. First, let's look back. Around 2 years ago, I made a video asking the question, what would happen if you were Falcon punched? It's one of my favorite early videos, and looking back to this video, I get a lot of the research out of the way. In case you don't know, the Falcon Punch is Captain Falcon's signature move. Captain Falcon being the protagonist from F-Zero, though this move, Falcon Punch, is from his Smash Bros. Incarnation. Having done this video in the past was a huge help, as Captain Falcon's fist catches ablaze due to its force in the same way that Saitama's does from time to time. Most prevalently, in the intro to the anime. In this video, I figured out what it would take for your gloved fist to catch fire through nothing more than air friction. And long story short, for a gloved fist to catch fire long term, it would have to be moving at Mach 12, meaning the fist is moving at the speed of sound a dozen times over. So 4,067 meters per second. That Mach 12 speed is just what it would take to ignite your fist. And that's if you have plenty of build-up time for the temperature to rise at a solid pace. And that ignition is just a little flame. Who wants that? I want a big fiery bird! Quah! Or an explosion, like in Saitama's case. The biggest factor of all is that during a punch, especially a punch as fast as Saitama's and Captain Falcon's, you have very little time and distance to reach that point of temperature. In fact, the flames come out very early on in the punching motion, as in it's almost instant. If you were to build up to a speed of Mach 12, you would have all that time accelerating to build temperature up too. But in this case, we don't have that luxury. The fist needs to go from static to flaming in under half a second. The The temperature of the fist needs to go from the regular temperature of the air to its ignition point of 212 degrees Celsius, and then some, in under half a second. In order to do that, your fist would have to be moving at an astonishing Mach 23, 7,683 meters per second.
Mach 23 and flying fast, come on! Power Rangers in space!
That speed is just for Captain Falcon. Saitama, our one brunch flan, completely surpasses this. By leaps and bounds, even. We can see this raw power in the opening, where we are focused on his fist bursting into flames. Seriously, having his fist so prominently right here has been a huge help in this video. Anyway, after catching fire, it then bursts into a flash of light and then appears to be vibrating rapidly and has turned white. So not only is the fist now moving so quickly that fire can't keep up with it, but it lost all of its color in a burst of light. This is called the Doppler effect, also known as red and blue shifting. To best explain it, let's imagine you're standing on the sidewalk and you see a fire truck heading your way. You hear the sirens going off, and as it passes you, the sirens sound a bit different and odd compared to when the fire truck was coming towards you. Now that the truck has passed you, the sirens sound lower and slower. From the siren's perspective, it's been putting out the same sound as ever, but from the observer, it has gone from high-pitched and fast to low-pitched and slow. This is due to the differing wavelengths of the sound. As the source of the sound approaches you, the sound waves are condensed, getting smaller, thus faster. But when the source of the sound is moving away from you, they are longer and slower. Interestingly, this same phenomenon applies to light as well. It just is hard to notice to the typical observer because light just moves so dang fast. So to get an idea of how it works, we need to look to the stars, which happen to be light years away. If stars are approaching the Earth, it has shorter light waves, as they are more compressed, so stars have a bluish tint. Whereas stars moving away from the Earth appear to be red-shifted, because we are getting the longer wavelengths. And while Saitama's fist doesn't exactly blue shift into a greenish hue, it does lose its color and has a chromatic aberration filter applied to it. Not everything has to be 100% scientifically correct, and in this case, we call it artistic license or artistic liberty. Artists do this all the time, changing something to not be as scientifically or historically accurate, but in doing so, they make it look a lot cooler. And honestly, this looks way cooler than if it was just changing into a green color. Bleh. But taking this screenshot into Photoshop reveals that this white is actually just a really, really bright purple. So it's kind of accurate? Anyway, for something to blue shift drastically enough to lose all of its red color, it would have to be moving very, very quickly. As in 46 to 54% of the speed of light. And for the sake of simplicity, rather than going with this range, let's just say 50%. 50% the speed of light is the speed that Saitama's fist is moving right here in the intro, which, as of now, seems to be the fastest his fist has ever moved, and thus, this is the seriousest punch he has ever given. As of now. So moving at half the speed of light would mean that his fist is moving at that many meters per second. Or more simply, 335.5 million miles an hour. Now, it could be argued that Saitama can indeed go faster than light, as he was able to dodge the light speed slash attack by Flashy Flash, aka Light Speed Flash. However, it can also be argued, and with significantly more evidence to back it up, namely science, that Light Speed Flash and Slash are just names, and not actually the speed of light. If this character could go at the speed of light, then every atom he would hit would explode, including all of them in the air and in a very wide radius. Light speed is simply an exaggeration. So now for the literally burning question, what would happen if you were punched by Saitama at full force, or at least at the force as seen in the intro? And again, for the sake of simplicity, we will assume that Saitama's fist is the average size for a male fist. Well, firstly, this means you will be punched at a force of 95,950,000,000,000,000 joules of force, or about the equivalent of 23 megatons of TNT, meaning about 1,400 times more powerful than Little Boy, the nuclear bomb dropped on Hiroshima. If this punch happened in Miami, Florida, this would be its effect. New Jersey, this effect. And nothing of value would be lost. What gets interesting is that because this explosion is caused by a sideways moving punch rather than a dropped bomb, the explosion wouldn't be a perfect circle. Rather, it would be somewhat cone-shaped. There would be this spike poking out of the sphere. And this spike and sheer power of Saitama makes sense, as we frequently see him accidentally taking out mountains along with the enemies. A feat that generally takes kilotons and megatons of power to do. And while being punched by Saitama, you'll have to be dealing with significantly more than just the force of the shockwaves, because as the fist moves, it starts heating up more and more, hence the igniting. But at full force, this fist goes beyond ignition, and as it speeds up, its mass and density increases exponentially, and in the end it will be around 71,500,000,000,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 2.6 million times hotter than the core of our sun, and about 24,000 times hotter than the hottest stars we know of. And it doesn't really matter how much further we go with this, because at this point, and a significant number of points below it, you will not only die in one punch, but your body will be turned into mist, burned and exploded at the molecular level, liquefied. Getting punched in the head in this case is extremely mind-blowing. Just as mind-blowing as how overused this joke is. And this is only what would happen if you were punched by Saitama specifically with this punch in the opening sequence. And he could very well be restraining himself here too, as he often does restrain himself, not even bothering with half of the punches he pulls. So it is very possible that even this is not the maximum limit of his power. But we'll just have to wait and see where the story takes us. What to do? What topic to sell out to today?
Oh, you should totally make a video about Five Nights at Freddy's. I hear the milk is still fresh with that topic.
Yeah, it's been like a year since you posted your last Five Nights at Freddy's video. You should do it.
Oh my god, Foxy, you have no idea what sarcasm is. Five Nights at Freddy's is pretty much a dead cow at this point. The milk has gone sour. We are way past the expiration date.
Why would you say something like that? Five Nights at Freddy's is one of the most successful indie franchises in all of video game history.
Except it has crashed and burned so hard.
Okay, hold on. Before you both get into a heated, elongated argument, could you explain why you think Five Nights at Freddy's got so popular?
Well, there are quite a few reasons actually. I'll start by mentioning how available the games are. The original game is available on Steam for $5. The sequels are available for $8. All these games don't take up a lot of processing power, so you don't need a top-of-the-line gaming PC to play them. And there are mobile versions to the games. This means the games are extremely available for people to play, just as long as the internet is accessible. Also, the game is very stable. It doesn't crash unless it wants to, like with the appearance of Golden Freddy.
Now hold on! The games are very short and have very little replay value. Once you understand the pattern of the animatronics, the game's no longer scary. Heck, it's very debatable that the game is even scary in the first place, just because it's the same repetitive jump scares. Remember PewDiePie's video where he played the fourth game? He finally came out and said the game was boring, and his fans even hated him for it. They wanted him to pretend to be scared. Also, there's Alex from I Hate Everything. He had some really good points about FNAF's horror in his video.
Well, that depends on who you ask, but to continue with what I was saying, not only is it a widely available game series, but it also caters to a wide demographic. There are two groups of people involved here. Anyone who has grown up in the 80s and 90s know how terrible animatronics used to look. Early animatronics commonly fell into the uncanny valley.
Your cooch is an uncanny valley.
What was that, you Chuck E. Cheese reject?
Whoa! What happened to your voice?
Let's just say that Foxy has a little trouble in the downstairs area.
Bonnie?
You know, the nether regions.
Bonnie?
She has the ability to change genders.
Bonnie!
Wait, how do animatronics even have a gender?
Don't know, we're just built that way.
Just like how you're gay for the other Foxy?
Hey, just because Tumblr says I'm gay does not mean it's true.
Okay then, let's get back to the subject.
As I was saying, people who grew up in the 80s and 90s knew how terrifying early animatronics were. Some of these people grew up with a childhood fear of animatronics. Five Nights at Freddy's takes this childhood fear and throws it into people's faces. The other large demographic Five Nights caters to is kids. These games are very tame for horror games. It's so tame that concerned parents would be okay with their kids playing it. Connor the Waffle made a great video pointing this out.
Anyway, I need to say this now, that the kids in the FNAF fandom are the worst things ever.
Oh, Bonnie, how could you say that? Children are such angels.
Angels? First off, look what they've done to you in the past.
Yeah, well...
And second, kids have access to the internet where they can interact with people older than them. This is really bad because they don't have any clue how the real world, aka the adult world, works. They get offended easily, they don't know how to properly voice their own opinions, and they can be very, very annoying. There's probably a lot of kids making angry comments about this right now. Prepare yourselves with seeing all caps, bad grammar, no spell trick, and an obscene amount of swear words or swear root substitutes because children have no better way of expressing their thoughts.
But aren't you just a child's soul possessing an animatronic body?
Yeah, that was the case 25-ish years ago, but guess what? Ghost children grow up too.
Oh, okay.
But you can't be bad-mouthing our audience like that.
Yeah, whatever.
Oh, I should definitely talk about how Five Nights at Freddy's spread. It can mainly be broken into two parts, and it's interesting. Currently, Let's Play videos are extremely popular on YouTube. This is mainly because YouTube favors channels that upload long videos on a frequent basis.
That's because they're so damn easy to make. It takes next to no skill to make a Let's Play channel. Especially since YouTube just loves frequently uploaded videos that tend to be long. There's a reason why this genre is so oversaturated on this site.
Though that may be true, Bonnie, you could have said it in a nicer way.
Dude, I don't care anymore. YouTube is just a wasteland of Let's Plays, prank videos gone sexual, top 10 listicles, and drama bullcrap that gets more popular than actual quality content.
What? You don't think this video was content?
Well, if it is, maybe you should put it on RedTube since Foxy's involved.
Don't you mean YouTube Red?
Nope. RedTube.
Oh, spring locket, you purple double-shafted dildo.
Why don't you go back to playing with your esoteric sex toy?
It's not a sex toy, it's a selfie stick. I want to be hip with the kids.
Anyway, Let's Play videos act as a free advertisement for the video game that's being played. And horror games tend to succeed very well when featured in Let's Play videos. It's not only about the game, but also about seeing the hilarious freakout reactions we see when the players get scared. Let's Play videos involving horror games do really well. Just think of when Amnesia, Slenderman, and SCP Let's Play videos were everywhere. It's like Let's Plays and horror games are in one of the best symbiotic relationships on the internet. The videos build an audience, that audience turns into a fandom, and that fandom ends up creating more fans. Fans that share their own art, stories, music, and other media that's inspired by FNAF. And all of that also serves as free advertisement. Look at sites like Tumblr and Reddit. They make it easy for people to share and communicate their interest in Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, the fandom builds upon itself. But here's the problem. Five Nights at Freddy's was made by only one person. I give him credit for making all the games on his own, but it's just that. He only made the games. Sky never focused on moderating and managing the fan base. There was no way to stop false accounts from getting made, false rumors spreading, fan art getting stolen. The FNAF fandom was out of control, and there's nobody that was able to control it.
But realistically, are any fandoms controlled?
There's some fandoms where it's obvious there's a driving force that's nudging them in certain directions.
May I take a closer look at a specific part of the FNAF fandom?
Sure, go ahead.
Of course now, we can't talk about the FNAF fandom unless we also talk about the theories. Five Nights at Freddy's is just one big murder mystery, which means there's so many fan theories out there. People talking about the story and sharing their theories is helping that free publicity concept I was talking about earlier. It's true that this part can be grouped with the fandom part I discussed earlier, but I think the theories really gets the conversation going.
Hold on! I really need to get this off my chest now. The FNAF theories are probably the most stupid part of Five Nights at Freddy's. Remember how we mentioned that a lot of the fandom is just a bunch of kids? Well, kids tend to not be very educated. They're dumb. They are so dumb, they don't realize it. So try to imagine them attempting to solve a very obscure murder mystery when they don't even have a good concept of logic. The posters on the walls show teardrop stains, so that must mean the phone guy is the killer. And don't forget the top 10 cupcake theories! They are the best! Excuse my straw man here, but it's all stupid. Not to mention that all these theories are milked out the butt by some of the biggest guys on YouTube, and everyone just drinks it all as fact. They are all nonsensical BS, and every single goddamn theory maker can go f***.
Well, Bonnie, you certainly have an interesting vocabulary.
That was horrible, Bonnie. You are horrible.
Yeah, well, hashtag no filter. These theories are terrible, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that thinks that.
Well, all this talk about theories reminds me about something with YouTube. Even though Twitter, Reddit, and Tumblr all played a big part in making FNAF a viral hit, I'd argue that YouTube is the main drive behind why FNAF became so widespread in such a short amount of time. Part of it is how the site is designed. YouTube is one big information cascade. If lots of people watch a video, that video ends up being promoted more and more. The same applies with trends. If a lot of people post videos about the same topic, those videos end up getting promoted more. It creates an incentive for creators to make FNAF videos, because FNAF is popular. Once FNAF started trending on YouTube, any video that was related to FNAF performed really well.
Which explains the crazy milking I mentioned earlier.
People who were absolute nobodies gained mass audiences just because they made FNAF videos. The YouTube comment system also plays a big role, especially in the context of fan theories that float around. The YouTube algorithm favors videos with lots of comments and lots of likes and dislikes because they're hard to fake, unlike subbotting and view farming. So every time people get into a long discussion about some FNAF theory or fans and haters start arguing about the game, in the end it all just helps the videos get bigger and bigger. Dislikes do this too. It's a big cycle. And just look at all of these YouTubers that have FNAF-related videos as their top videos.
Yeah, and the biggest part about all this is the topics I just talked about are not isolated from each other. They all form an interconnecting web that makes the Five Nights at Freddy's fanbase. It's all one big positive feedback loop that just keeps growing and growing exponentially. The game creates fans, the Let's Plays create fans, the fan art and fan videos make fans, the theories make fans. And here's the big thing, all of this interaction and growth affects Scott's decision to make another game. This is the reason why the 4 main games were made in such a short time span.
The biggest downfall to Five Nights at Freddy's is how overhyped and oversaturated the series is. The 4 main games were made within the span of a year. That's insane, even though they were very short games. People look down upon franchises like Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed for having annual releases. Five Nights is just like them, but on crack. Which reminds me that the games themselves are really not that different from each other. You're just a person sitting in a place, just waiting for something to happen. You know that moment when a pop song is played on the radio over and over and over and over and over and over again? Just the same 4 chords playing on repeat until it gets so overplayed you really start to hate it? Yeah, same thing happened with Five Nights at Freddy's.
What about FNAF World?
Don't get me started on that pile of crap called FNAF World. It's almost as terrible as React World. The idea was good, but the execution was terrible. Scott really didn't study on what makes a good RPG good. The game didn't have solid design, and ended up being one big seizure danger. The fact that Five Nights at Boys and Undertale exist did not help it at all. Five Nights at Boys was absolutely hilarious if you like crude humor, and it seemed like Scott was just trying to make a kids-friendly version of that. FNAF World has nothing on Undertale.
So, you like Undertale more than your own game?
I mean, Undertale is sort of okay, I guess.
Oh, so now you're gay for Doggo.
No! What did I say about mentioning Tumblr crap?
You know what? I am sick and tired of hearing you guys fight. And I have enough robot furries in my life, so if you two could get out of here as soon as physically possible, that would be fantastic.
Fine.
Whatever.
They're gone. I need to see a doctor. What a wonderful morning for a nice refreshing glass of pack juice. But what is pack juice, you ask? Well, I have no idea, I made it up. I'm not gonna lie, I love Pac-Man, but not just as a character, but for what he symbolizes. While in modern times his popularity may be falling side of Mario and Zelda and other characters of the sort, but I would still very much argue that Pac-Man is the single most important character in the history of gaming. I just love everything about him, hence all this merchandise I own. In fact, there is a ton of Pac-Man merchandise, from the expected to the truly bizarre. And today we're going to look at those. Pac-Man cookie cutters, an oven mitt, ice cube trays? I guess that does make a bit of sense since Pac-Man is a game all about eating, so there would have to be some bits of Pac-Man cooking-ware, but now take a look at these. A stapler. Cute. Stress balls. It makes a bit of sense. A speaker. Alarm clocks. Keychain with sounds. These three are using the same outer shell even. They just swapped out the electronics. You could easily confuse these three for either of the others. Well, I guess that's better than confusing Pac-Man vitamins with Pac-Man candy. Magnets. A dog toy. Soap on a rope. Sticky notes. A keychain bottle opener. Why does Pac-Man need to be a bottle opener? He's not even close to the ideal shape for opening bottles. Heck, why does he need to be soap? You know, as silly as all of these are, I still respect them. I respect them as silly novelty gifts. They make sense for that. But you know, I can still respect Pac-Man lingerie. Pushing it, but it's still respectable. And even this article in Hustler magazine of Miss Pac-Man. That's really starting to push it, but I can still kind of see why it exists. Ah, porn. So forward-thinking, you know? Miss Pac-Man was the first major female heroine in a video game, and here she is, spread eagle in a porn magazine. It's beautiful.
Holy f*** is this wrong?
These Pac-Man puppets? No respect. None at all. And this Pac-Man piggy bank? Ugh! He looks simultaneously like a depressed raccoon and like he's in the middle of an S&M session. A lot of this merchandise is silly, and a lot of it is also pushing some boundaries, but then you get to ponchos! Ponchos? Ponchos is way too far! This is the worst! Oh, but we're not done yet. We're not even close to the bottom of the barrel, because beneath all of everything we've talked about so far, there lies the Pac-Man 3-piece suit. That's right, order yours now! Do you have no respect for yourself or your family? Wear this to your wedding! Or at all even, really! Just wear this at some point in your life and everyone will see you as the worthless heap you are, throwing your money around at god-awful suits. And you know, the fact that this is a 3-piece suit with Pac-Man on it isn't even the bad thing. It's just that it's so awful looking. It's pure ugly. If you wanted to have Pac-Man on a suit, you could have done it in a way classier manner, like this for instance. Like an all-black suit with just a Pac-Man tie. That'd be cool. Or even if the whole suit was Pac-Man, but it was more subtle. Like maybe if it was a pinstripe suit, but the pinstripes are dark blue like the Pac-Man maze, and the buttons are like pellets. Maybe throw in some ghost accents here and there, like the cufflinks. And there you go! A Pac-Man 3-piece suit that still shows off some class. Some nerdy class, but class nonetheless. But this is an abomination to the eyes. You would have to be packed out drunk to think that buying this for any reason other than a joke is a good idea. And even then, it's not even a good joke. You wear it once to a costume party and go, hey look everybody, I look like a stupid nerd who also happens to be a douche. And everybody will look at you funny for a few seconds and then proceed to avoid you the entire night. There's no way to win with this. Being a huge Pac-Man fan, I'm going to order one right now, aren't I? No. I can resist. No. I can resist. I believe. I can resist. question I'm sure a lot of us have asked. Mario does so many different things, but one of his most prestigious is being a doctor. But how could he possibly fit working towards a medical degree into his schedule? His schedule filled to the brim with princess rescuing, kart racing, and tennis. Well, today I bring you the answer. Is Dr. Mario a real doctor? Looking at his trophy data in Super Smash Bros. Melee, it seems to hint that he is indeed a doctor. Immaculate in his medical garb, Dr. Mario destroys killer viruses with his amazing vitamin capsule, with his dedicated nurse, Princess Peach, at his side. Dr. Mario spends his day and night in his laboratory working on new miracle cures. Somehow, he's managed to keep up with all the new viruses that have arisen over the years. This seems to be claiming that he is indeed a doctor, and some trophy data in Smash 4 seems to back that up. Mario and Dr. Mario are only slightly different. Basically, Dr. Mario is stronger, but his MD, that's short for medical doctorate, slows his speed and lowers his jump. Quick question, how does carrying around a medical doctorate slow you down and make you not be able to jump as high? How does that make sense? Back in Melee, it's explained that the reason an MD would slow him down is because of his lack of exercise. That he obviously lacks because of spending time in his lab, and somehow that makes him stronger. Anyway, it still feels a bit odd, doesn't it? How can this guy be a doctor? It just doesn't feel right. I would never let anyone with a face like this operate on me. Maybe it's the mustache. But so far, this data concretely tells us that he develops miracle cures in his lab and has his medical degree. And in his own games, he's definitely helping people with these pills. But while all that may be true, it says nothing about his legitimacy. Back in Smash 4, looking at another trophy reveals this sentence. In the 1990 puzzle game Dr. Mario threw on a white coat and decided to take a shot at the whole medicine thing. You see how nonchalant they are about it? This may have been Mario's own feelings on the matter.
I do everything else. I might as well try this too. Woohoo! I'll just throw on this coat and start shoving pills in people.
But, I mean, no one can just pick up a lab coat and enter the field of medicine and become a doctor overnight. But get this, a lot of people do. One study found that in the United States in 2011, about 50,000 new PhD holders, meaning new doctors, had fake PhDs. They never finished med school, or possibly never even took it at all. And what's scary is that during that very same year, there were only 45,000 legitimate, real PhDs given out in the US, meaning just over half of new doctors were fake doctors. Scary. Granted, most of these doctors go overseas. Still though, that number is astonishing. It's actually quite easy to fake a doctorate. You just need to find a corrupt system, or a degree mill, and cash out some big dough. Or coins, if you will. For a mere $8,000, you too could become a doctor. And you can become a doctor. And you can become a doctor. Everyone could become a doctor for only $8,000, mamma mia! And it's not like that's a lot of money for someone like Mario. Mario owns stadiums, islands, racetracks, and is in close relations to the princess, who is also taking part in the scam, by the way. She's his nurse. And looking back at the trophy data, he develops miracle cures? That is exactly what quack doctors promise. A good rule of thumb for finding a quack doctor is the very use of the words miracle cure. Lose 20 pounds instantly, lengthen your penis, cures your cancer. It's incredible. Look, we have a doctor saying so.
Yes, hello, I am real doctor, I have real medical degree, and this snake oil does real good to cure all of your ailments. Yes, everyone.
Considering how easy it is for rich people to just get a doctorate, and that more people fake them than not, it's not that big of a stretch to say that Dr. Mario did the same. He has no time to spend 10 hours a day for 7 years at school. And if we look at what he does in his own game, what is it? He literally pulls up random pills. Yes, random, and throws them into your digestive system. Oftentimes, these pills will be of no use at all, only harm. I only have yellow viruses left, Mario, and you just keep giving me red and blue pills. Doctor, my body can't take it anymore. I'm overflowing. He's playing with medicine, making guesses. Maybe not even making guesses, just picking up whatever pill is closest to him. What's shocking is that this actually happens in real doctors' offices far more often than it should. And yes, especially here in the US. Pharmaceutical companies send representatives to sell their drugs to doctors, essentially bribing them to give more of their drug and less of the competition's. Most of the time, real doctors are all cool with it. They still only give these drugs out when people need these drugs. But there have been numerous cases of doctors purposefully giving out inaccurate prescriptions in order to obtain more bonuses from pharmaceutical companies. The drug will often have some relation to the problem though, but it's like this. Oh, you're having migraines? Here, take this antidepressant that will likely mess up your hormonal balance and cause memory problems. But one of the many things that it happens to do is giving you a chance of curing migraines. Sure, there are prescriptions that only get rid of migraines and don't cause all these other negative side effects, but the makers of those ones aren't paying me. So doctors everywhere, both legitimate and not, are often experimenting. Throwing pills around that have no business being inside of someone's system. For more information on this doctor bribing problem here in the US, I recommend this video by John Oliver. It's very, very good. But back to the primary problem at hand. Dr. Mario here, whether legitimate or not, is throwing random pills at the problem until it gets fixed. Or, worst case scenario, causes further complications. A game over. Which indeed shows he is either experimenting, or has gone crazy and is a quack. Or just has no idea what he is doing because he never went to, or just dropped out of medical school. And his medical doctorate is a fake that he bought with his vast riches, which actually puts him into the majority of doctors. Which is still pretty scary, but considering the things that real doctors do here in the States is also alarming. But hey, maybe Dr. Luigi is more honest. No. No, he probably spent even less time training. I mean, his brother could have just photocopied his fake doctorate and wrote green over his name, and boom! Now his brother is a doctor too. Dr. Mario, the mystifying alter ego of Mario, the hero of the Mushroom Kingdom. Some say he's a heroic MD, out saving the citizens from contagious diseases. Others question the validity of his degree and accuse him of quackery. Is it possible then that the Dr. Mario games show that both answers are technically correct? In the Dr. Mario series, the player controls Dr. Mario by throwing pills into a sealed bottle and aligning pills and viruses of the same color. Once 4 or more objects of the same color line up, the pill parts and viruses vanish from the bottle. In the real world, this action differs greatly from antiviral medications. Real medications primarily stop viral infections by preventing viruses from multiplying too quickly while inside of a host. In a sense, it kills their sex drive rather than killing them. So eventually they just die out, with the help of your body's natural defenses. So, wait a minute. Hang on. If the pills Dr. Mario are throwing aren't some sort of antiviral medication, then what are they? Curiously, there is actually a type of chemical that destroys viruses rather than just inhibiting their growth. They are known as virucides. Virucides destroy viruses by reacting with them chemically in several ways. Some damage or destroy the envelope or outer shell of the virus. Others stop the virus from replacing its RNA. So if Dr. Mario is using a virucide, which one is it? Well, we'll get to that soon enough. First, let's look at the viruses. Now, obviously the design of the viruses is meant to be cutesy and funny, but they are different from regular viruses in another substantial way. Their size. Even granting that the pill is way out of scale when in Dr. Mario's hand for the sake of visual aid during gameplay, the viruses in the bottle must still be enormous. Just to give an idea of scale, the smallest common prescription pill on the market is the 3.125 milligram dose of Carvedilol. A heart medication. According to the National Library of Medicine, these tiny pills are approximately 5 millimeters wide and 6 millimeters long. If Dr. Mario's capsule pills had these dimensions, that would still make the viruses at least 3 millimeters by 3 millimeters in size. This might not seem very big to you or me, but in the microscopic world that viruses reside in, that size is absolutely titanic. Currently, the largest known virus is the ancient Pithovirus. This giant of a pathogen measures in a whopping length of 1.5 micrometers. That's half of the width of a typical strand of spider silk. Admittedly, that's still pretty huge for a virus. And even using the optimistically small measurements of the pills I mentioned before, this means that Dr. Mario's viruses are at least 200 times the size of the largest virus we know. And that's astonishing. Another odd thing about these viruses is that in every game we only see the exact same 3 basic type of viruses. What makes this incredibly weird is the fact that viruses mutate at an incredibly high rate, usually due to pieces of the host cell's genetic material being mixed in with the virus's original genetic material while the virus is replicating. Does this mean that the games are lying to us? Don't these issues prove that these are not in fact viruses? Well, not really. You see, despite these viruses not diversifying much like real-world viruses, or matching the size of any known real virus, they still act very much like viruses. In the game, the viruses in Dr. Mario's sealed bottles aren't really doing much. They move a tiny bit, but generally stay in the exact same spot. This differs greatly from the activities of, say, a bacterium, or a protozoan in a contained medium. In either of those cases, the microorganisms would be moving all over the place, eating and reproducing like mad. Viruses, being the ultimate parasitic form, literally cannot function without a host to invade. All they can do is float there, and react chemically with whatever enters their environment, which is exactly what Dr. Mario's viruses do. So what does this mean? It would seem from these facts and insights into the gameplay that Dr. Mario is indeed eradicating mysterious viruses from the Mushroom Kingdom, and yet, something is still missing. Where did these viruses come from, and why do they behave in such a strange manner? To answer this, we need to go back, all the way back to the first Dr. Mario game, the original version for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Upon beating the game with either medium or high speed settings, the player is treated to a short video of the 3 virus types sitting on a small tree. They stare into the night sky for a bit before standing up to greet a UFO. A UFO? The UFO then takes them on board and flies away, leaving a sparkling cloud of dust hanging over the tree. This scene implies that the viruses are extraterrestrial in origin. They literally came from outer space. This revelation actually answers a lot of our questions. In the low-gravity environment of space, the viruses were able to evolve much larger forms than would typically be possible on a planet. They also likely evolved a unique manner of replicating which was incompatible with the biology of the residents of the Mushroom Kingdom, making it difficult for them to reproduce at high rates. The evolution of a unique replication mechanism is not unheard of, by the way. All the way back in 2004, scientists found a species of bacteria called Desulfatuli psychrophilia. This bacteria is unique because it manages to reproduce at temperatures which would freeze most life forms solid. Now, a picture is starting to form. In the midst of a hostile invasion of alien germs, one man donned a lab coat and head mirror, intent on defeating the viruses from outer space. He developed a basic viricide to use and continually experimented to increase its efficiency. Eventually, he perfected it, taking out all but a few lingering infections in the Mushroom Kingdom. To see what happened afterwards, we must turn to story mode in the most unique Dr. Mario game, Dr. Mario 64. In story mode of Dr. Mario 64, the player witnesses flu season overcome a small seaside town. Right on cue, Dr. Mario runs in for the rescue with his amazing Mega Vitamins. The player sees the Mega Vitamins kill the alien viruses and apparently cure the townsfolk of the flu. The scene transitions to the nearby beach where a character complains of a severe headache. Dr. Mario swoops in once more, with the game noting that Dr. Mario can cure anything with his Mega Vitamins. Upon defeating the final boss of story mode, Dr. Mario uses the Mega Vitamins to cure the final boss's cold as well. Something seems fishy here. As mentioned before, viruses mutate at an incredibly high rate. Both rhinoviruses and influenza viruses undergo major structural and chemical changes as they move throughout the population. That's why it's necessary to have a yearly vaccine for the flu. The vaccine accustoms your body to this year's new kind of flu. With this in mind, the fact that Dr. Mario's Mega Vitamins are continuing to work is very suspicious. Back when I was listing how virucides worked, one example I gave was that of Zidovudine. Zidovudine has been used in the treatment of HIV and AIDS in the past, since it works so effectively at preventing the human immunodeficiency virus from copying its own DNA. Unfortunately, some strains of HIV mutated to become resistant to the medicine's effects. This is possible with any virucide and almost inevitable with even a moderately sized population of hosts being infected. Since we're back on the topic of virucides, let's resume our search for which viruside Dr. Mario might be using. I brought up a few before, namely these ones. Zidovudine has shown some amount of effect with viruses similar to HIV, such as the Friend virus, but not with your more average everyday cold virus, so we can rule that one out. Cyanovirin has shown much promise in its reactivity with a wide variety of viruses in the lab, notably various types of influenza and rhinovirus. There's one minor problem though. Thanks to its chemical structure, cyanovirin is a universal allergen. Anyone who is unfortunate enough to have cyanovirin enter their body would likely die very quickly from various tissues undergoing inflammation, and in particular, anaphylaxis. It would not be pretty, so strike cyanovirin off the list too. That leaves us with cyctovirin, which has shown much of the same efficiency against many common viruses as cyanovirin, but with far less potential for an immune response. Does this mean we have a winner? Was cyctovirin our mystery substance in Dr. Mario's pills all along? It's possible, but I have to admit I have been holding another candidate back. One that is not only incredibly common and easy to find in nature, as opposed to cyctovirin, which has to be isolated from bacteria, but is also known to be safe for basic consumption. In fact, most people consume an amount of this substance every day as part of a balanced diet. The ability of this substance to rid people of viruses is so well known, in fact, that you may have been told to consume more of this substance the last time you had a cold to get better faster. What substance am I talking about? Ascorbic acid. Vitamin C. Seriously. All the way back in the 1970s, Nobel laureate chemist Linus Pauling openly hypothesized that high doses of vitamin C could prevent people from catching colds. Intrigued by the claim, the National Institutes of Health performed a set of studies revolving around the effects of vitamin C on people. Unfortunately, the studies were not scientifically rigorous enough to have conclusive data on the possibility, but the idea lived on, slipping into popular culture. Really, Linus Pauling just wanted a bunch of money from people buying his vitamins. More recently, scientists have found that vitamin C does have a close connection to the immune system, likely powering one of the plethora of processes that allows the body to defend itself more easily against any type of invader. In other words, vitamin C will not cure your cold, but it does help your immune system fight it back. That was a lot to take in. Yet, considering it all, the alien origin of the viruses, the virucidal properties of the widely available vitamin C, and the effort Dr. Mario made throughout his games to eradicate the alien virus, the final pieces of the puzzle have fallen into place. The story of Dr. Mario is complete. Once upon a time, a terrible event befell the Mushroom Kingdom. An alien disease invaded, with tiny red, blue, and yellow viruses all about. The hero of the Mushroom Kingdom, Mario, found he could not defeat the tiny foes with his usual brute force tactics, and was forced to attack from a very different angle. He put on a lab coat and began his research, becoming Dr. Mario. As Dr. Mario, he experimented with various substances, attempting to find one that could kill the viruses off. Eventually, he found success with vitamin C, perhaps derived from a Yoshi fruit or a roasted Cheep Cheep. And perhaps vitamin C in the Mushroom Kingdom is significantly more powerful. Either way, he then roamed about the land, killing mini-viruses and concentrating the dosage of vitamin C in his capsules until he was victorious. With mini-viruses eradicated, a few retreated back into space, leaving only a small amount behind, lingering in isolated pockets. The people, having literally seen the visible viruses eradicated by Dr. Mario's new Mega Vitamins, sang his praises, believing that this new medicine could cure anything. Perhaps Dr. Mario thought this as well as he roamed the kingdom's lands, treating colds and the flu with his legendary Mega Vitamins and the powerful accompanying placebo effect. In the end, the man who was once a hero, the great Dr. Mario, collapsed into quackery as he went around treating his patients with basic vitamins and a strong placebo effect. It's not really a happy story, but unfortunately that sort of thing can happen even to the best of people. In his later years, Linus Pauling became a proponent of an alternative medicine treatment called Mega Vitamin Therapy, which used doses of vitamins far larger than is safe for human consumption to try and treat conditions as varied as heart disease, arthritis, and high cholesterol. It seems far too appropriate then that Dr. Mario, the Quack, would call his supplements Mega Vitamins. Harley Quinn. One of the first cartoon crushes of many of us who grew up watching cartoons in the 90s. At the time of conception, no one knew that Harley Quinn would explode in popularity as quickly as she did. Originally designed as a sidekick to the Joker, she has since become so much more than that. So what then does the growth of Harley Quinn teach us about the psychology behind domestic abuse? Back in the 90s, cartoons based on comic books were hitting their heyday with series based on the X-Men, Spider-Man, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. DC had decided to get in the game with Batman, the animated series, being headed by the now highly acclaimed dynamic duo of Bruce Timm and Paul Dini. The two series co-creators would eventually create a sidekick for the Joker in the form of a jester suit-clad former psychiatrist named Harley Quinn. While initially written as a side character, eventually Harley would develop into a beacon of strength for victims of abuse, though many years down the road as it happens. It was more difficult to tackle the subject of abuse when these cartoons were being produced, so most of the violence against Harley was treated in a very slapstick-heavy fashion. At the same time, though, there are moments where they let the violence hit heavier. However, the big part of what they did show is the emotional abuse and manipulation that kept Harley coming back. To get into the real issues that plague Harley, first we have to go back and look at her abuser, the Joker. Just who is the Joker? He began his run in the comics with Batman #1, in which he was depicted as a ruthless killer. But by his origin, at least what of it we have, we know that he began his criminal life as the Red Hood. He jumped into a vat of chemicals while running away from Batman, and the rest goes down in DC history. Then a different history. And then a rebirth of the other history. I can't keep up anymore. Anyway, what we do know about the Joker is that he is arrogant, homicidal, a charmer, a loner for the most part, and keeps his emotions close to the surface. And he has an overall lack of empathy for anyone. Now, if we look at the symptoms of an abusive personality, we can see the Joker indeed fits many of these roles. The symptoms being violent family history, jealousy, controlling behavior, quick involvement, unrealistic expectations, isolation, blaming others for problems, hypersensitivity, cruelty to animals or children, non-consensual, playful use of force in sex, verbal abuse, dual personalities, past battering, threats of violence, breaking or striking objects forcefully during an argument, and, well, many more. The Joker fits most of these symptoms perfectly. While we don't know much about his family history or his preference in sexual activity, thank God, he can be easily paired with any of the other symptoms. The reason we need to investigate the Joker's unfavorable traits is to establish the dynamic between him and Harley Quinn. So what are the symptoms of abuse? Isolation, lack of trust, denial, anxiety or fear, hypervigilance, shame or guilt, aggression as a defense, becoming overly passive or compliant, frequent crying, avoidance of eye contact, feeling powerless and defeated as nothing you do ever seems to be right, learned helplessness, feeling like you're walking on eggshells, feeling manipulated, used, and controlled, feeling undesirable. And those are just some of the short-term effects of abuse. If we look into the history of Harley, we can see the same effects on her from the Joker. And while it would be easy to examine the individual symptoms and effects of abuse, I want to take a minute and look at the overall dynamic presented primarily in the pre-New 52 and animated universe. Honestly, it could be argued that New 52 presents the situation in an even worse light, which is why we'll table that for later in the video. Now, in Mad Love, the most common origin story, we see Harley as a somewhat established psychiatrist, Harleen Quinzel, who has just started working at Arkham Asylum. She almost instantly becomes obsessed with being the one to crack the Joker. This leads ultimately to Joker turning on his charm and manipulating Harley. So begins the emotional abuse. Joker tells a story about his physically abusive father in order to gain sympathy from her, and it draws her in. She feels like she knows more than anyone else about the Joker now. She alone now knows what makes Gotham's resident psychopath tick. She tries digging deeper every day, and eventually these conversations develop into simple, friendly conversation. She starts talking about her issues while the Joker listens, and thus the Joker learns more and more about her, until one day, he escapes. Though as always, he's brought back in after a fight with Batman. We are all meant to see just another Joker vs. Batman fight, but that's not what Harley sees. Due to the time she spent with the charming and manipulative Joker, she sees him as a battered child, much like the story he told her. It prompts her to take action and release the Joker herself, after donning her alias as Harley Quinn. Which, by the way, is definitely the greatest way to hide your secret identity. I wonder who Harley Quinn is. This begins a long history of both physical and mental abuse by the Joker, and is expressed in the animated series by wacky slapstick, off-screen hits, pet names, and seduction. In almost every instance, Harley gets pulled back in after every fight, and this leads us into the well-known cycle of abuse. To the disdain of Harley, Joker treats her like an item instead of as a person. And when she actively tries to receive attention as a human being, the Joker starts boiling. His tension finally reaches the surface. Acute violence represented in the series as him throwing her out the door, or an off-screen hit, or in the worst case, knocking her out of a window. This is when the Joker calls her back and seduces her. He brings her back into this vicious cycle under the veil of pseudo-love. The average person would call this ownership. So why then would someone stay in such a situation? Is it because Harley truly loves him? Well, yes and no. We can't just discount her feelings for him. She is severely infatuated with the Joker, and this adds to the denial that she has when someone brings up her abusive or toxic relationship, especially when he says he'll change. But why else would she stay? Her infatuation can't be the only tether, right? There are multiple reasons people stay in these kinds of relationships outside of the Stockholm Syndrome-esque feelings for the abuser. We have fear. The fear of what could happen to the victim if they try to cut ties with the abuser. Now, where we don't get much of this is in the animated series. In the comics, their relationship is even darker because it hinges on a more sadistic Joker, and in turn, a more heavily abused Harley. So terror, fear for her own life, is one factor that keeps her there. The belief that her relationship is normal also comes into play, as shown multiple times in all three versions, animated series, pre-New 52, and post-New 52. She argues about how she loves the Joker, and the Joker loves her too. He just gets a little rough sometimes, which, as we all know, is a gross under-exaggeration. Another issue we see is that throughout the entire lifespan of this character, we see her constantly being berated and put down by the Joker. She's lost so much self-esteem that she thinks this is what she is. She believes she's worthless, especially without the Joker. We also see her inability to leave for a couple of reasons, both being a criminal and because she has no way to go back to the life she once had. This creates a problem with her being able to leave because she ends up relying on the Joker for support. She comes back because by herself on her own, she can't live as comfortably. She has no place to sleep and she has no money. These are all real issues victims go through. Sometimes the situations are just too hard to leave because of not only internal reasons, but external reasons as well. And when you bring up the argument that someone in that situation could just stay with friends, in many cases they are avoiding that option for the same reasons heroes hide their face behind a mask. They don't want the people they care about to succumb to the same torture and violence they've endured. And in other cases, it's because they feel so worthless that they feel like they're a burden on everyone. But as I mentioned earlier, New 52 added new aspects to the origin of Harley that potentially makes the story of her and her relationship even worse, changing her original story into a character with already established mental issues who decides to become a villain as an experiment. The change into this already arguably unstable character just weakens her relatability. However, what tops the change in origin here is that Harley's choice to become the Harley Quinn we know is taken away by the Joker. Instead, it is he who takes Harley and throws her into the vat of chemicals that dyed his skin white, cementing her position as the villain known as Harley Quinn. Then, in the cruelest of plays, Joker throws her to the wolves, causing her to have a breakdown. But this is where her story takes a different turn. She slowly becomes more and more estranged from the Joker. She starts to become her own person again. Joker becomes this point of rage for Harley instead of infatuation. This goes on for a while, and while this is happening, she finds a new relationship. Harley finds Poison Ivy. Ivy, in all three versions of Harley's story, but most recently in New 52's continuity, has been a source of support. She is the first healthy relationship Harley has ever had. She shows resentment for the Joker, for how the Joker used her and threw her away. She boosts Harley's confidence back up enough so that she could confront the demons of her past. Why is this important to our study of Harley? Because if you have a friend who is in this sort of abusive relationship, then you can try to be their Ivy. Despite Harley and Ivy being confirmed as a sexual relationship, at its core, it is built on years of friendship and trust. And it says to people who are reading this journey that being the support system for the abused person is giving them hope and strength. Harley and Ivy are the relationship that Harley initially wanted with the Joker. She's confident, comfortable, trusting, and most of all, able to be herself. Harley by this point has had her own adventures with Ivy, Power Girl, and the Suicide Squad, and this has had a phenomenal change on her. She's a much more powerful person with all of these experiences, and just recently in her solo, ongoing Harley Quinn number 25, she sent a powerful message to anyone in a situation such as hers. She finally found the strength to move on. Even in the last meeting with the Joker, he still echoes lines of abuse, with "You'll never rid yourself of me. Without me, you are nothing." To which Harley responds by walking away. While hers takes the form of finally physically overtaking the Joker, it's the symbolism of this that's important. She is literally taking her demons on face to face. Every bit of pain that he brought her, every berating moment fuels her to take him down and finally move on. That's the real message here. She's moving on. She's becoming herself again, and she's not afraid of the Joker's fury anymore. It took her years. And in many real-life cases, it takes just as many years, if not longer, to get out of that situation. But if the support system is good, then we all have hope. And we can all help our loved ones who are going through this. And they will get through this. Ooh, I have a new conspiracy, guys. It involves the identity of a certain skeleton that loves knocking around the old funny bone. Drumroll, please. That's right, Sans is none other than Big Skeleton from the 1992 Welsh cartoon Funny Bones.
But where is your concrete evidence?
Concrete evidence? This is a YouTube video. Just believe everything I say or my fans will attack you.
Oh, well, okay.
Okay, so maybe we don't know the actual identity of our skeletal quipster.
Unless, of course, his identity is none other than Sans the Skeleton.
But what we do know is that there are some deep psychological problems or issues deep within the mind of this character. Namely, his depression. But in order to understand what exactly comes into play for Sans' character, we have to know what depression entails. So what is depression? Many people assume it just means being sad all the time, and while that may be a part of it, it is by far not the only piece of the puzzle. Taken directly from the National Institute of Mental Health, major depression is defined as severe symptoms of depression that interfere with your ability to work, sleep, study, eat, and enjoy life. Which is a straightforward meaning. Now let's look at the symptoms. Persistent, sad, anxious, or empty feelings. Feelings of hopelessness or pessimism. Feelings of guilt, worthlessness, or helplessness. Irritability, restlessness. Loss of interest in activities or hobbies once pleasurable. Fatigue and decreased energy. Difficulty concentrating, remembering details, and making decisions. Insomnia, early morning wakefulness, or excessive sleeping. Overeating or appetite loss. Thoughts of suicide, suicide attempts, aches and pains, headaches, cramps, or digestive problems that do not ease, even with treatment. And some of us know these symptoms all too well. Though being a skeleton, digestive problems would be an interesting case. It's easy to see how these all fit into the way Sans reacts to decisions in the story. Sans is shown having a huge feeling of futility and hopelessness. His dialogue, especially in the genocide run, shows just how he feels things have been all for nothing. You can't understand how this feels, knowing that one day, without any warning, it's all going to be reset. Look, I gave up trying to go back a long time ago, and getting to the surface doesn't really appeal to me anymore either. 'Cause even if we do, we'll just end up right back here, without any memory of it, right? To be blunt, it makes it kind of hard to give it my all. Or is that just a poor excuse for being lazy? Hell if I know. And now I know you're all saying, well, we already knew that. And yes, that's because this is the most pertinent point of our pesky punster. But there are more clues to his depression. Such as him falling asleep while on his job, but even more so, falling asleep during the fight with him. While it could be argued that it's the fight wearing him down to exhaustion, he's certainly not working his fingers to the bone. Simplified, this could be caused by a number of reasons. But, as we know, depression can cause intense insomnia, which, in turn, turns into fatigue. And with insomnia and fatigue, you try to sleep whenever your body lets you. You can be tossing and turning all night, unable to get a wink. And then, middle of the day, you can take a nap. Sans finds sleep whenever he is able to, but because he's constantly on and off and on and off, he feels so fatigued that he just can't keep up with everyday activity. And those are just a broad stroke of things that could affect someone with major depression. The Sleep Foundation actually outlines many variants on each of these issues and adds a few lesser considered ones. But now it is also heavily implied that Sans has guilt over something. Perhaps the incident with Gaster. It is the dialogue of the Lost Soul version of Sans that hammers it home, though. You'll never see him again. It could also be that Sans is one of the very few people who seems to be able to see all of the timelines and game resets. Maybe this is why he has feelings of futility, and why he just sits by while the genocidal path takes place. And all the while, this gives him a feeling of guilt. But we'll get right back to this later. For now, though, let's look at another aspect of Sans' personality. His affinity for comedy. Sans wants to make people laugh and enjoy the life or lives that he can't. Humor has been well known as a shield against harsh realities. In fact, the term gallows humor describes just that. Sans is using something that we, as humans, use to deal with harsh anxiety. Sans' very design is even used to reflect his emotional state. His face, while wearing a skeletal grin, also resembles a mask. A mask to hide his true feelings. We all wear metaphorical masks from time to time, and Sans is no different. Also, notably, he wears the color blue, which is a color often used, as many people know, as a means of expressing sadness, depression. You feel the blues. And finally, even his undead appearance could speak to his feeling of despair as well, since often, death is used as an emotional metaphor for depression. More tangibly, it represents a person that wants to be dead, but is still just shambling around, living life like a zombie. Morbid as it is, some people go through with that. But before we get any deeper into that, let's look at the importance of Sans' relationship with his brother, Papyrus. To us, it seems Papyrus is an oblivious failure at catching humans, who also happens to be obsessed with spaghetti.
Lots of spaghetti!
And while there is much more to his character than that, the real importance is that he is Sans' anchor. Papyrus is the reason Sans is sticking around, because he cares so much for his brother that he can't completely detach from his life. Papyrus is the glue that binds Sans to the path he's on, and one of the reasons he looks at his situation the way he does. Another important character in understanding Sans is Toriel. She presents a similar anchor weight, as she and Sans are in a deep bond. So much so that he attempts to keep a promise for her. This is important because Sans typically is not the type to keep promises. While Papyrus is the strongest bond for Sans, Toriel is another string attaching him to the protagonistic ideals he holds. But it doesn't end with clinical psychology now, does it? No. There are plenty of philosophical ideas at play as well. It has been suggested by many sources that Sans is philosophically in line with nihilism. And while partly true, there is a more specific word we could be using here. Determinism. There's that ever-important word again. Determined pops up again and again throughout Undertale in a fashion. Determinism could best be described as the universe. From birth, it is put on a track and moves ever onward, ever advancing, ever expanding. And now, what could be considered a universal birth in a video game? A reset. When the game tells you that you are filled with determination, it is not a hope of making it through the trials of the game itself, but instead it is telling you that you are filled with the determination to continue on the path you chose in the very beginning, that being neutral, pacifist, or genocide. So, how does this apply to Sans and his depression and apathy? Well, because he's fighting against a philosophy that says nothing he does matters. This ultimately leads him to decide that it's not worth it to try and stop you from a neutral run, so he just stands by and judges you instead. Even then, he's shown to be fighting against his deterministic side, as being a true deterministic nihilist would suggest that morals are just as pointless as the lives that lead them. But ultimately, he succumbs to just letting whatever happens, happen. With the exception of the genocide route, in which he states, "All I know is, seeing what comes next, I can't afford not to care anymore." Again, more evidence that he is in a constant struggle with a deterministic view. Every possible timeline has and is happening, and he's seen them all. so he has no choice but to be a determinist. It's almost as if Toby Fox, this game's creator, designed the game as the story of Sans coming to terms with his own futility. And perhaps that is why we can all relate to, and thus love, Sans the skeleton. We can all fall into periods of, what's the point? Or, I don't care. And while many of these wonderful characters in the Undertale world represent various attributes of the human condition, Sans hits the hardest. Depression, apathy, futility, and a constant struggle between giving up or standing up. But, on the side of the true pacifist run, we get a new ending. This ending suggests that even Sans has the hope to be happy. Which means, we do too. We don't know our future. We don't know our infinite other timelines. It's all in the dark to us, but that's okay. Because if we stay determined, then we can get the endings we're after. You don't have to have a bad time. Giratina. Or is it Giratina? It's not Giratina, that'd be terrible. Giratina, the dark reality-bending dragon Pokemon. It's popularly thought from the Pokemon mythos that Giratina is meant to represent antimatter, but does it? Or is Pokemon lying to us? This episode contains major plot spoilers for Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. So if you haven't played those games yet, well, you're late. In the 4th generation games, the deranged cult leader Cyrus tries to reshape the world using the powers of Dialga and Palkia. This winds up ripping open a portal that leads to the Distortion World, home of Giratina. In the Distortion World, all sorts of bizarre things happen. Chunks of land and bodies of water float in midair, some seeming to face sideways or even upside down, yet you can still walk on them. Platforms rise and fall and swing from side to side for almost no apparent reason at all. As the player, you are told that space and time are being warped in the Distortion World, and let's keep that in mind for later. So what leads many people to believe that Giratina is supposed to be the Pokemon of antimatter? Well, in the Sinnoh Origins myth, it is mentioned that soon after Arceus created Dialga and Palkia, matter was wished into being by the two Pokemon of time and space. It has been known for several decades now that the physical process that creates matter from pure energy also creates a mostly equal amount of antimatter. Knowing this, it seems obvious that Dialga and Palkia's wish for matter gave rise to Giratina to lord over matter's mirror image as it formed. Yet, there's evidence that this assumption is wrong. In the 4th generation games, the NPC Cynthia informs the player that, according to myth, Giratina came into being at the same time as Dialga and Palkia, far too early to be created solely to look over the yet-to-exist antimatter. Another argument for Giratina being the antimatter legendary has to do with Arceus' banishment of Giratina. We know this banishment was because Giratina was dangerous and was causing too much destruction, so many assume that this destruction was caused by antimatter connecting with matter, which we know causes both to be completely annihilated. While this is a good possible explanation, there's nothing stating this scenario flat out, or excluding other possibilities. However, the biggest piece of evidence, of course, though, is that Cynthia tells you full on that this is a world of antimatter. So wait, am I saying that this factoid that is in the game is wrong? Is Cynthia wrong here? Yeah, she is. She does mention that she's only studying mythological Pokemon and is striving to learn all she can, meaning she may not be a full-on expert here. And this isn't the first time this has happened, that being stuff said in the game is wrong. For example, in Pokemon Black and White, it is said that Kyurem fell from a meteor from outer space, but then in Black and White 2, it's revealed that that theory was wrong. Kyurem is just as old as Reshiram and Zekrom, and they all came from one original dragon. It's just like in real life. There are 5 different theories about how the moon came to be. There are plenty of expert astrophysicists who claim that one of these theories is the true one, but then other experts say otherwise. Cynthia assumed this antimatter connection. It's her theory, just like me telling you that she is wrong is my theory. So hey, I could be wrong too. So let's go through why Giratina can't be antimatter, and is instead gravity. Let's go back to the statement that Cynthia made in the Distortion World. space and time are being warped. How could this possibly be? Dialga and Palkia were never in the distortion world with the player, so how could Giratina manipulate them? If this world were antimatter, then your body coming into contact with it would cause it and the world to explode. Giratina wouldn't even have to touch anything really. Coming into contact with our world's air would cause it to explode and cease to exist. That's what happens when antimatter and matter come together. They both merge and no longer exist. It's the one true way to annihilate matter permanently. Also, antimatter would not cause all of these distortions in gravity. That's not what antimatter does. So clearly, this world isn't made of antimatter. So again, how could Giratina manipulate time and space here? Why is water flowing sideways? Why are all of these land masses acting funny? Actually, the explanation is very simple. It's gravity. Giratina is the lord of gravity in both the Pokemon world and the distortion world. Random pockets of gravity fluctuating all throughout the distortion world would explain the sudden changes to the land and your ability to walk on them, as well as the changes to space and time. In Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity, the force of gravity acts as a distortion of space and time. The more gravity there is in an area of space, the more time there is to go through when traveling through that area. Gravity also sort of squishes space together more, so the more gravity there is, the more space there is to go through as well. Giratina controlling gravity explains both the time of creation and banishment problems I mentioned before. Gravity, as a phenomenon which affects both time and space, would have needed to be created in the same event as time and space. Gravity also has a very strange power to it. Thanks to its properties, an infinite amount of work and thus energy can be derived from gravity if it were to condense enough in one area of space-time. Black holes are a result of gravity running unchecked, becoming stronger and stronger until space and time are warped to gravity's will. Arceus didn't banish Giratina because antimatter was annihilating matter. Rather, Giratina's gravitational forces were causing chaotic conditions too harsh for life to form. Arceus moved Giratina into an alternate, emptier universe, the distortion world. There, Giratina's incredible powers were safely contained as the Pokemon universe went through its delicate forming phase. Just imagine the harmony of all of these Pokemon coming together and creating the Pokemon world, only to have Giratina fly by and accidentally create a black hole right next to it.
Again? This is like the dozenth time you've done this!
But after spending countless millennia in the distortion world, Giratina learned by trial and error how to properly control its powers over gravity. The platforms that the player walks on were previous mistakes. This is why Giratina can safely come into the Pokemon world in Platinum without accidentally causing massive destruction. It has gained experience in its solitary confinement. All in all, Giratina is just a misunderstood legendary that doesn't deserve the dark cloak of mistrust it's been given. It's one awesome Pokemon.
The world of Pokemon is a vast one. The lore is deep, its design is intense, and as such, there are possibly thousands of fan theories. Today, let's cover 10 fan theories revolving around Pokemon evolution, one of Pokemon's deepest and most controversial elements. Number 1. Was Magikarp originally going to evolve into Dragonite? Have you ever wondered why Magikarp evolves into Gyarados? Well, it actually has to do with an ancient Chinese legend involving a lame carp being determined enough to climb a waterfall, and as such, its wish gets granted and it turns into a ferocious dragon. The thing is though, Gyarados is not dragon type, it's more of a flying, angry water serpent. But if you look at Dragonite, this is undoubtedly a dragon, and it even shares some visual similarities with Magikarp. And switching out Dragonite with Gyarados in its own evolution line also works with the whole blue serpent thing. So as the theory goes, these two Pokemon were switched at some point during development. Number 2. Genesect is Kabutops. According to Pokedex entries, Kabutops is a slim and fast swimmer. It slices its prey with its sharp sickles and drinks the bodily fluids. It is thought that this Pokemon came onto land because its prey adapted to life on land. Kabutops is a 100% kick-butt hunter, or rather slice-butt hunter. It evolved from Kabuto, which is thought to have inhabited beaches 300 million years ago. Now, looking at Genesect's Pokedex entries, over 300 million years ago, it was feared as the strongest of hunters. Team Plasma altered it and attached a cannon to its back. So they're both from 300 million years ago. If Team Plasma took a Kabutops and altered its genes, and mix it with some sort of insect, give it some artificial purple armor, attach a cannon on its back, Kabutops is Genesect. Number 3. Also, Kabutops is an ancient scyther. It is said that 300 million years ago, Kabutops grew its legs to walk on land, because that's what its prey did. So we know that, similar to Darwinian evolution, Pokemon over millions of years changed too, starting in the water and then changing into birds, reptiles, insects, and eventually mammals. A very dominant trait, meaning one that gets passed down a lot, are those large scythes that it has for hands. Large scythes. Scyther. Scyther could very well be the long-term descendant of Kabutops. Though, one is a crustacean and one is an insect. So, well, shiny Kabutops is the same exact color as Scyther. But is that enough to convince you? Number 4. What if Genesect is actually Golisopod? Golisopod and Wimpod are also ancient Pokemon, though based on ancient animals that haven't changed much in the millions and millions of years. And if you just took some of these extra limbs away, Golisopod also shares similarities with Genesect, visually, somewhat. And Genesect's other form looks similar to Wimpod. So Team Plasma could have taken these Pokemon instead of these ones. It's possible. It's a theory. Number 5. Aerodactyl is an ancient Zubat. You've probably heard that dinosaurs turned into birds, right? There's that whole joke about the mighty and ferocious T-Rex becoming wimpy little chickens. Now, think about what is the lamest and most irritating Pokemon? Zubats. Bats aren't birds, obviously, but you could easily say that Pokemon evolved differently. The visual similarities are certainly there, that being between Zubat and Aerodactyl. Number 6. Were Butterfree and Venonat swapped? This is one of the most common Pokemon theories out there, but it's still interesting. If you compare the design elements of the evolutions of these two Pokemon, you'll notice that Venonat seems much more similar to Butterfree than to Venomoth. From the eyes, mouth, color, the existence of full-on feet, and even subtle things like the horns and stripe lines are all here. Were these Pokemon swapped later into development? Admittedly, from many people's perspective, Butterfree has a lot more appeal than Venomoth, so it might have been that the developers swapped these two so that more people could have a Butterfree early on in the game. Number 7. Sharpedo and Garchomp have a very near shared ancestor. Gible and its Evo line are land sharks. Carvanha is a piranha that evolves into a shark head. And come to think of it, Gible is also just kind of a shark head with legs. Could it be that these two Pokemon have a very near shared ancestor, and one took the path of life on land, and the other in water? Garchomp and Sharpedo share plenty of design elements, and even Carvanha has this design thing in common with it. They also all have slits in their fins, and their megas both make them look ridiculous. The original plan could have been that this evolution line would go Carvanha, Sharpedo, Garchomp, before eventually Game Freak decided to give Garchomp its own evolution line. Number 8. Is Shuppet Rotom? Look at these two. And now consider that the Reaper Cloth item is used to evolve Dusclops into Dusknoir, which looks just like a fancier Dusclops with a Reaper Cloth over it. So are Shuppets secretly Rotoms with Reaper Cloths over them? Rotoms like to possess things, possibly because they like hiding for whatever reason. And if there's no electronics around, possibly because this is ancient times before they are a thing, they may like to just cover up in a blanket, which would explain why Rotoms are insanely rare. And this cloth may not conduct electricity very well, thus removing Rotom's electric type. Though, Shuppet is able to learn more electric-type attacks than most other ghosts. Number 9. The Marowak and Kangaskhan connection. Another very common theory. So according to the Pokedex, the skull on Cubone is the skull of its mother. Now look at the baby Kangaskhan and Cubone. Makes me sad. But plus, in the Generation 2, 5, and 6 games, Cubones and Kangaskhan's are found in the same areas. So as the theory goes, Kangaskhan possibly was originally the final evolution of Marowak and Cubone. It outgrew its mother's skull and then had a baby of its own. And number 10, the Kangaskhan-Charmander connection. The previous theory isn't the only theory around Kangaskhan, as the baby Kangaskhan in the pouch isn't even the right color as Cubone and Marowak. And plus, the skulls don't exactly line up. So another theory is that Cubone is an unlit Charmander. Fire would be an issue inside of an egg, so perhaps when a Charmander hatches, either the trainer they are with or the Charizard mom in the wild lights their tail ablaze. As we know, if this flame goes out, there is a good chance the Charmander will die. But what if mom isn't around to begin with? What if she died while protecting the nest? The newly hatched Charmander would never get lit, and perhaps because it never does, its body doesn't adapt to it and gain and thus need the fire typing. Rather, it lays there, alone and dirty. And it takes its mother's skull and adorns it upon its head. Because also, the Cubone skull lines up much better with Charizard's head than with Kangaskhan's.
Pokemon is just getting dumber and dumber. I mean, the Sun legendary Pokemon isn't even fire type. Lame.
Hey! You shut up! SolgAleo is design genius!
SolgAleo is actually really cool, and not being fire type makes it all the cooler. I just noticed that that's a joke. So of course, being the Pokemon of the Sun, everyone assumed that SolgAleo would be fire type, but he's not, and that makes him all the better. And there are a few reasons for this. One main reason has been floating around Twitter and Tumblr, but I'm going to be bringing up even more points as to why it's awesome. So firstly, in SolgAleo's Pokedex entry, it states that SolgAleo is the beast that devours the sun. It isn't the sun, it just eats it. Just like this lion, and all of these other lions. Why are all of these lions eating the sun, you ask? Well, this is a common symbol in alchemy, the medieval forerunner of chemistry. The sun-eating lion represents the purification of metals, which often leads into the creation of steel. So steel typing makes sense for this symbolic reason. SolgAleo's Pokedex entry also says that, since ancient times, it has been honored as the emissary of the sun. Since ancient times again points to alchemy, medieval chemistry, helping that whole point out even more. But also, people in ancient times believed that the sun was not fire, but rather a large ball of blazing metal, again supporting the steel typing. And we'll get back to the steel typing soon, but to better understand everything I'll bring up then, I need to first bring up the psychic typing now. We also see that SolgAleo as well as Lunala have third eyes, that open when they attack. Third eyes, of course, being a representation of one's powerful psychic abilities. Also, a good number of people were speculating about a new cosmic typing, but rather than making a new type, psychic was substituted instead. Similar to how in the Pokemon trading card game, a lot of types are merged, like grass, bug, and poison all being grass, as well as rock, ground, and fighting all being fist. A lot of Pokemon could even have subtypings if Game Freak so chose. I doubt every single steel-type Pokemon is actually made of steel. Many may consist of various other metals and alloys, but we can't have a steel-type, iron-type, aluminum-type, etc. Just like how we don't have a wood-type. A cosmic type would possibly be similar enough to psychic to make it not matter. And plus, one stereotype of aliens is that they all have massive brains and telepathic abilities. In other words, they are all psychic. But back to the much more interesting steel typing, why steel over fire? Even if it's just that the lion eats the sun, you are what you eat, right? Well, yes, and guess what? The sun isn't fire at all. It may look fiery, but in fact, every star is plasma, a sort of solid liquid gas. I hope that clears everything up. The sun is made mostly of hydrogen and carbon, but also has iron, sulfur, magnesium, and more. A lot of metals. As stars die, their elements that perform fusion start to run dry and turn into the first element that cannot perform fusion, which is iron. So, SolgAleo being steel type makes sense. Iron is not steel, but the Aggron line are made of iron, and they are steel type, again showing that steel type really just means a bunch of metals. Now think about the sun. It's just a star. Jirachi is also a star, and guess what? Jirachi is also psychic steel type. We could also view steel as a pseudo-light type. A lot of steel type moves involve light, like Flash Cannon, Doom Desire, Mirror Shot, Metal Burst, and more. And what does the sun do for us on Earth? It gives us light. If SolgAleo was psychic fire or steel fire or something along those lines, it would be the easy way out. Not very educated. Pokemon, Pokemon, Pokemon. Well, now in the games we have Pokemon that are mistyped? That's not the word. Variant forms of previous Pokemon that now have a new type, such as the Ground-type Sandshrew now being Ice Steel and the Fire-type Ninetales being Ice Fairy, and Executor took a bit too many Viagra and swapped Psychic for Dragon to become a Grass Dragon Pokemon. This caught many people by surprise, and while the newly typed Pokemon's looks are definitely awesome and surprising, the concept itself isn't so surprising. These are just Delta Pokemon. Delta Pokemon, you ask? Well, yes, Delta Pokemon. In the Pokemon trading card game, Delta Pokemon was a series of cards that gave Pokemon different types, given to them by these strange crystals. Crystals? Gems? For example, here is a Fire-type Ludicolo, a Fighting or Rock-type Blastoise, a Normal-type Deoxys, and Electric Fearow, you know, the works. Fire Kingler, Rock Cacturn. Are you noticing anything here? These crystals are just one common theme in these cards. There's also plenty of palm trees and ferns, tropical plants. In fact, I went ahead and looked through every single Delta card and found that most of them fit into a number of categories. The most common category, of course, was generic backgrounds, blank slates, just fancy designs of the backgrounds, things you couldn't exactly pinpoint a location on. But the other categories were that the backgrounds would have crystals, or tropical plants, or were on the coast, or were in a canyon. All of these are very reminiscent of the Alola region. So what does this mean? I don't know, what do you think? Controversy. It's a word we tend to throw around a lot in the gaming culture, especially nowadays. From censorship to cutting out features that were always a part of the games they came with, there's always something happening that's throwing gamers into a tizzy. Even the often critically acclaimed Fire Emblem franchise has fallen victim to this trend. What with the whole Shin Megami Tensei Cross Fire Emblem game turning into J-pop idol stories. But did you know that there are even more controversial changes to Fire Emblem that you have never heard of? Well, today I'm here to help you learn a little something with Fire Emblem's Top 10 Controversies. Number 10. Name changes. Now, this little tidbit is easily the least controversial subject on the list, but that's why it's number 10. It's still very interesting, though, to say the least. As the Fire Emblem games have started to be ported internationally over the past decade, many changes were made to the games, and in particular, people's names. Many of the names in Fire Emblem continuity are references to mythological beings, often which tie into a character's persona, such as Nana from Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War being named after the Norse goddess, and weapons such as the Ragnarok and Guy Bulg being consistent throughout the series. So while localizing them to another country, it's difficult trying to maintain this while not having some ludicrous name that no one in a particular region would understand. One of the characters from Path of Radiance named Mist actually had to be renamed Alja, of all things, in the German localization, despite her name being one of a mythological Valkyrie. But why was it changed? Because Mist in German is a curse word. That means shit. Literally, shit. So take that as you will. Famously, Marth, the iconic swordsman from that one Fire Emblem game that you may have played, Super Smash Bros. Melee, was originally called Prince Mars when he made his first appearance internationally in Fire Emblem the anime. This anime's dub was so bad that it's good, and thus really didn't do much to help with Marth's appearance. Number 9. Cut content from Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem. Now here is where we get into some actual controversy for the series. The first one, to be exact, Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem is an oddity of a game, being a remake and a sequel at the same time. Coming out in 1994, it was a retelling of the original Fire Emblem from the Famicom, but with some things missing. 5 entire chapters, along with the 6 characters that were contained within them, were wiped away from the first game, titled Book 1. If your favorite character was within one of these chapters, they were gone forever. All of this was because the Super Famicom was a puny little device in terms of storage. Putting books 1 and 2 together was an impossibility with this console. So, as Book 2 was the one with the brand new content, Book 1 received the cut. While this didn't necessarily trample on the original experience, it still left many fans of the original game hurt for its loss. Number 8. Skinship. Here is where we get into what you, the viewer, might already know. Fire Emblem Fates has been one of the most interesting Fire Emblem titles to date. In controversy, I mean. This controversy all stems from the removal of one thing: skinship. Skinship was a bizarre idea introduced into Fire Emblem If, the Japanese version of Fates, where you could pet anyone who came over to your private quarters by rubbing your stylus all over them, just like Pokemon Ami and Pokemon Recover, but with people. And I mean anyone. Your brothers, your sisters, reincarnations of characters from past games who love it to death, and many more. This starkly contrasted with everything the Fire Emblem series previously stood for. A serious fantasy medieval drama with a bit of humor thrown in for added effect. So many people, in many reasons, were surprised by this addition. But the main chunk of controversy came when the news got out that this feature would be removed outside of Japan. The internet collectively revolted against its removal. There were petitions and fan outcry across the board for the removal of this petting minigame. A surprise compared to many of the other controversies that have plagued the series. Speaking of which, number 7. Fire Emblem GBA. Ah, the original Fire Emblem, or the original for the world outside of Japan. Released on the Game Boy Advance in 2003, many praise this game for its story and gameplay, but there's one significant portion of the game that was one of the few times where the series actually held your hand: Lynn's story. Lynn's story was the beginning of Fire Emblem for many, but in all actuality it was a bona fide tutorial that took up a portion of the game. It was all around easier than the rest of the game, requiring little strategy to complete. Even the series' iconic permadeath feature wasn't an issue, as any character who fell in battle in Lynn's story would still come back for the rest of the game. Worst of all, there was no ability to skip it and continue on with the main story. Or was there? As a prequel to the Japanese-only Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, there were some features that we were just never given. One of these was the ability to connect your save data from the Binding Blade to the new Fire Emblem, which allowed for something much needed: the ability to skip Lynn's dreadfully awful story. It was the classic old-school mentality of Nintendo all over again, thinking that a Western audience was unprepared for the difficulty that the Fire Emblem series entailed. Americans are dumb. This feature even included an epilogue that concluded the story fully and connected it to the Binding Blade, which was included in the North American version on the cartridge, but not in the European version for some strange and unknown reason. What is Nintendo doing? Number 6. Radiant Dawn difficulty modes. Fire Emblem 3CS 776 is considered to be the most difficult Fire Emblem by Japanese players and others who have played it, but to the rest of us, Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn may just take that title, and all of it was because of a single translation mistake. You see, the Japanese version of Radiant Dawn had 3 difficulties: normal, hard, and lunatic. Each steps up the difficulty immensely. So if you can't handle these higher difficulties, there was always the bog standard normal mode. But the problem is, everyone else didn't know that. You see, internationally, normal, hard, and lunatic were changed into easy, normal, hard. This artificially increased the game's difficulty for many, as most would avoid the easy mode altogether, as, well, easy is always easy, especially in a strategy game. Easy mode's for babies. Or, people that just want to play a game for the story. Now, while Radiant Dawn was hard to beat just like any other Fire Emblem game, this changed people's opinions about it, with many review scores and the poor sales reflecting this, stating the game is far too difficult for players, when really, they were playing on hard mode, which is for experts. One single translation error changed an entire game, possibly ruining its reputation in the long run. Number 5. Gay conversion therapy. Fates seems to just love being the rowdy and controversial brother of the Fire Emblem family. While internationally, most of the story bits for the game stayed the same or only changed ever so slightly, one particular support conversation between your avatar, Corrin, and a single character rectified that. This scene was about SolgAleo, one of the many children from the Nor storyline. Like basically every single character in the game, you can choose to romance her with Corrin. In the American version, they fall in love and yada yada, it's all just typical standard romantic stuff, but the Japanese version wasn't like that, however. Not at all. In the cutscene, it's revealed, or at least heavily implied, that SolgAleo is a lesbian. At this point, Corrin apparently wanting to help SolgAleo, who implies that she can't concentrate on being a badass warrior when there's cute women around, spikes her drink with a magic potion, which causes SolgAleo to see men as women and women as men. This, to Nintendo of America, had to be cut out of the game as it resembled and somewhat advocated gay conversion therapy, a highly controversial practice that still exists today. Many, of course, cried foul at its removal, claiming that this was censorship, and thus debate ensued all across the internet. Number 4. Changes with Fire Emblem The Binding Blade. Once Fire Emblem entered the Game Boy Advanced era, the entire series was radically mellowed down from its previous entry, 3CS776. Early adopters of the new system enjoyed the next entry, Fire Emblem The Binding Blade, for its simplistic yet colorful story, and found the previous games to be nothing in comparison. Binding Blade's gameplay was easy, to say the least, and required less thought than any map from 3CS776. This shattered the Fire Emblem community into two sides. One that was hooked on the new direction the series was taking, and another who wished to dial back the clock to the era when Shozo Kaga, the series creator, was in charge. While Binding Blade's changes to gameplay and other departments helped make the series immensely more enjoyable to new audiences, since sales were on a drastic decline from their last entry, somewhere along the way it had lost its heart and soul of what it meant to be a Fire Emblem game, which caused this splitting of this community. After the initial negative reception of Binding Blade, it took a long while for the series to earn back the trust of its devoted fan base, but they eventually did earn that trust back. For a time. Number 3. Changes with Fire Emblem Awakening. Now, here is where very old school fans of the series get really testy. Fire Emblem Awakening, a game that is hailed by many as a fantastic game in its own right, is actually somewhat despised by the Fire Emblem faithful. Binding Blade had done much to appeal to the somewhat more casual gamer crowd, but not nearly as much as Awakening did. Casual mode removed permadeath entirely, negating one of the series' primary features. Players could grind endlessly with their units by heading back to old locations via the world map, turning their characters into super soldiers and making Awakening a breeze if you chose to do so. And the level cap was broken entirely to go along with this. You didn't even need to grind to make things easier, as the pair-up mechanic did that for you, allowing 2 units to join forces and make it all the more troublesome to kill you. So depending on how you played the game, Fire Emblem Awakening could be the easiest Fire Emblem game you've ever played, or the most difficult one. And this didn't set well with many fans. While Awakening saved the Fire Emblem franchise from its own demise, it couldn't save itself from its community, with many considering this another terrible turning point for the series. And also there was the whole Naui controversy, a little girl that you could marry and have a child with. But it's fine, because she only looks like she's 6, but she's actually a 1,000-year-old dragon person. Number 2. Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem versus Awakening. Ever heard of Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem? I doubt you have, unless you're a more hardcore fan of the series. Coming out just a few years before Fire Emblem Awakening, many forgot this title even existed, let alone its importance to the Fire Emblem series in general. Most consider Awakening to have many innovations for the series, but in actuality a lot of that is owed to Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem. Awakening didn't introduce casual mode, New Mystery did, so a lot of the controversy around Awakening should be towards this one. New Mystery also introduced the idea of a playable and customizable avatar for the player, so they could be a part of the story. But more importantly, this entry is actually the hidden savior of the franchise. If New Mystery hadn't sold well, it may have been possible that the franchise would have been dead right then and there. It didn't sell incredibly well, only a measly 270,000 copies, but it was enough for Nintendo to go through with Fire Emblem Awakening. So without Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem, the series wouldn't have the mainstream status that it enjoys today. And to many hardcore Fire Emblem fans, it is a huge tragedy that no one seems to remember that, or this game, at all. And number 1, the Tear Ring Saga lawsuit. This right here is the most important out of all of these supposed controversies. You see, back in the day, Fire Emblem was created by Shozo Kaga and his team at Intelligent Systems. They enjoyed great success for nearly a decade, with the franchise only becoming more and more popular by the day. Shozo Kaga created great, innovative titles such as Fire Emblem Genealogy of the Holy War, which introduced the weapon triangle,
and was a sweeping historical and generational epic, along with Fire Emblem Thracia 776, one of the hardest games ever created. And of course, the original Fire Emblem, which paved the way for the tactical RPG genre. But as his franchise reached the end of its console era, he had looked to the Nintendo 64 for its next entry. Fire Emblem 64, Maiden of Darkness, would have been this, but soon after its apparent cancellation, Kaga left Fire Emblem and Nintendo behind forever. From here, he founded his own company, Turnanog, and went on to create the spiritual successor to Fire Emblem, Emblem Saga. But this wouldn't be on a Nintendo console, oh no, he was making it for the good old Sony PlayStation. Prior to the game's release in 2001, Turnanog received legal pressure from Nintendo, as they wouldn't have an extremely similar game in name and concept being released on the direct competitor, stating that they felt it was used deliberately for promotional purposes, bringing false recognition to users. This led to the team changing the name of the title to Tear-Ring Saga, and removing any direct references to Fire Emblem, a month and a half prior to release. These initial changes allowed the game to be released as scheduled, but Nintendo still sued Turnanog and their publisher, Interbrain, for still infringing on game licenses and copyrights. While the lawsuit never came of anything, this series itself soon fell into obscurity along with the creator of Fire Emblem himself. It's no surprise to anyone that Luigi has been put on the back burner for many games. Originally, just being a palette swap of Mario, Luigi made his debut in Mario Bros. So, from the get-go, he was in the shadow of his older sibling. And though he hasn't had as much of a personality until about halfway through his career, his history can provide some insight on why Luigi is the way he is. During Yoshi's stint as a protagonist, we see the beginning of the split between the brothers' personalities. Luigi is kidnapped from the very beginning of his life. He is kidnapped and held in a castle, being exposed to sounds and sights that, frankly, if you saw as a young child, would give you trauma for years to come. The National Child Traumatic Stress Network even states that a growing body of research has established that young children, even infants, may be affected by events that threaten their safety or the safety of their parents or caregivers. And their symptoms have been well documented. These traumas can be the result of intentional violence, such as child physical or sexual abuse, or domestic violence, or the result of a natural disaster, accidents, or war. Young children may also experience traumatic stress in response to painful medical procedures, or the sudden loss of a parent or caregiver. And while Luigi is endangered by the Koopa clan, Mario is off having a relatively carefree adventure with parent-like figures in the Yoshis. Mario knows on some level that he is protected. Every time anything bad happens, Yoshi is right there to save him. Meanwhile, Luigi is stuck in a bag, probably crying his little baby Luigi eyes out because he's so scared. Separation anxiety is one angle to look at it, as a few other YouTubers have explored, but the other angle we have to explore here is how childhood trauma could affect the psyche of a future hero. The symptoms of childhood trauma are pretty broad, but there are a few that can apply to Luigi. Specifically, those who suffer from childhood trauma may scream or cry excessively, startle easily, are unable to trust others or make friends, believe that they are to blame for the traumatic experience, fear adults who remind them of the traumatic event, fear being separated from a parent or a caregiver, are anxious and fearful and avoidant, show irritability, sadness, and anxiety, act withdrawn, and lack self-confidence. There are a multitude of examples of this throughout the Mario titles, and of course the main series of Luigi's Mansion that we'll look into in a moment. But first, we have to go back to the 1980s once more. During the 1980s, it's fair to say that storytelling in video games was mediocre at best. But the absence of evidence may not necessarily be the evidence of absence in this case. What am I saying? Where was Luigi in Donkey Kong? Why wasn't he there helping Mario capture this escaped ape?
The easy way out is to say, Lockstin, he wasn't even made yet, and it wasn't a two-player game. But if we apply some of the symptoms, I think it can suggest a bit more. Clearly, in later games we can see that Luigi doesn't have the highest self-esteem, and has heavy anxiety. Perhaps he wasn't in these games chronologically because he didn't think he could do it. This would be the point we find the brothers grown up in Brooklyn, and even Mario may not have gone on some of their more dangerous adventures at this point. But it should also be noted that, interestingly, Mario went off to war, specifically Vietnam. As in Mario's Bombs Away, he is helping transport explosives in the Vietnamese jungles. Chronologically, this very likely took place before Donkey Kong, before he fully grew up into the Mario we know today. He likely is very young here, though still technically an adult. Mario here is very brave, among the bravest, defending his country from the USSR menace. It's weird to know that this is technically canon, but it should be noted that yes, Mario here was very brave, and Luigi is, again, nowhere to be found. Likely not even considering joining the military, which honestly is a good thing for him and those he would be around if he had joined, as Luigi has been shown having severe bouts of panic and terror. Which again makes sense, because if we take a look into the effects of childhood trauma, we see that it can, and often does, have an effect on the adulthood of a victim. It would be safe to assume that Luigi had been suffering panic attacks and bouts of extreme avoidance with the world. While this era's Mario was traveling the world and space, taking parts in wars and multiple very dangerous jobs, and even wrangling apes, Luigi stayed behind, avoiding the world at all cost. Because childhood trauma can manifest itself in an adult as post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks, depression, disassociation, dissociative identity disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, eating disorders, and personality disorders. In short, if an ape that could crush you were loose, Luigi could have been at home fearing he'd get the call that his brother was dead. He fears the outside world, and couldn't imagine it without his brother Mario. He can't even leave the house until Mario invites him on a simple plumbing job. In Mario Bros. For the arcade, Luigi begins to come out of his shell. He tags along with Mario to help with a couple of pipes with blockages, and what happens? He is forced to fight his way out. And he does it. This is the confidence boost he needs to realize that he isn't as helpless as he's made himself out to be. He doesn't absolutely rely on his brother for everything. Finally, we get to the first of the Super Mario series of games. Luigi, while still in the background, sees more of the adventure. He's decided that he can do this. Plus, he's got a nice safety net with his brother being there with him. And through this game, Mario is there, supporting Luigi, finally happy that his brother is out and about. But then, what happens at the end of the game, at least canonically? Mario gets the credit. But Mario doesn't really understand the effect that this could have on his brother. While Mario gets the praise for saving the day, Luigi gets humbled again. Because as per usual, he gets sidelined and doubts himself. This isn't enough to set him back too far though. He goes on the next adventure, and while he keeps getting sidelined by Peach, it doesn't affect him in the same way. He understands Mario and Peach have kind of a thing now, and he's okay with that, but at the same time, Mario's ego is growing, and eventually, by the time of Super Mario RPG, he pushes Luigi, his one and only true brother, out of the picture. We end up seeing Luigi at the end of the game, still trying to hold on to the spotlight, but what comes next sends him nearly back to square one. Luigi's childhood trauma and his adulthood anxieties will come back in full force as Mario pushes him out of the spotlight completely. There are titles on the Nintendo 64 in which we get to play as Luigi, true, but never on an adventure. It's never the same kind of fun he could have with Mario. Mario has changed. He's a star now, a superstar, if you will. Luigi now feels the shadow of his past coming back to haunt him. He withdraws at this point, coming out for sports and parties, but never making it out for another adventure, because he just doesn't feel he matters anymore. The sports and parties are all just new celebrations of Mario's fame, and Luigi lets him just take the limelight and becomes ever more reclusive. And while it can be argued that Paper Mario happens in an entirely different universe from the main series, it is commented on that Paper Luigi goes through similar things there, with pages in his diary expressing his want to travel with his brother, but ultimately being shut down. Until one day, Mario volunteers to once again take the lead and investigate a creepy mansion. But not just any creepy mansion, no, this was a creepy mansion that Luigi had won in some sort of sweepstakes. But when Mario doesn't come back to tell Luigi that it's safe, it's now up to Luigi to venture out on his own. He takes his first step forward in years because he has to. When he arrives, he is terrified. He realizes that Mario may not be here to save him if something happens. And looking at the difference in the mansion he supposedly won versus the one that he actually won, it's no wonder that he is hesitant. But he pushes on for the brother he knew, not for the brother who became a star. Luigi has been in a dark place for so long that this is his shot to fight back against his own inner demons. And this makes the perfect metaphor, as his enemies in Luigi's mansion are ghosts. And after defeating them, he gains a bit of his confidence back. Luigi feels happy once again, and this time saves Mario himself. But sadly, this event didn't hit Mario's ego enough to allow him to let Luigi go on adventures still. Though perhaps, maybe Luigi still just isn't quite ready to get back into it full force. However, what does happen here is that it at least gives him enough leeway to get drugged back into adventures in games like Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga. Though, as plenty of scenes in the Mario and Luigi series show, Luigi is still not so confident about it, and truly is just being dragged along the way. So ultimately, Luigi goes back into the sidelines, but still keeps up with all the Mario sports games. In one of these sports games is an important part of this puzzle though. After coming home from another adventure, Mario still has an ego boost. He's saved the day in Isle Delfino and takes the next couple of years to organize another tennis tournament. Luigi decides to compete in the singles tournament and ultimately winds up beating Mario. Mario congratulates Luigi by grinding his shoe. Mario, still on a power trip, tells Luigi in his own way that he'll never get out from under him. Meanwhile, in the Paper Mario universe, we get a glimpse of Luigi's darker side. In Super Paper Mario, it can be argued that the brainwashed Luigi had been manipulated into using his negative feelings towards himself and his brother to turn into Mr. L. He even partially serves as the final boss, being part Luigi, part Chaos Heart, and part Dementio. It is fair to note that even in Super Smash Bros. Brawl, his dark side is hinted at as well. This energy that he conjures up is said to be birthed from the dark side he embraced in his brother's shadow. Back in the mainstream Mario universe, we see Luigi trying to step back into the main role, but still ending up as a bit of a side character with playability in games like New Super Mario Bros. And Super Mario Galaxy. Mostly though, he is still regulated to being a complementary character to Mario in various sports titles and such. Even in the handheld titles, such as the Mario and Luigi games, he's shown to have little to no fame. And they really express his cowardice. In fact, if we look at the first game, Superstar Saga again, when Mario is put out of commission and Luigi has to step up to venture out solo, it is only when he's hypnotized into believing that he is Mario that he has enough bravery to go. This is also a subtle nod to the inferiority complex he developed with himself, as it would suggest that he believes Mario to be the pinnacle of heroism. So, what now? Is Luigi doomed to be the shadow of Mario's exploits, or will the lime green light shine on him? Thankfully, the answer to that is yes. As a starting player character in New Super Mario Bros. U, it's only been uphill from there. 2013 was marked as the year of Luigi. This meant it was time for Luigi to step up to the plate in his brother's absence. This meant he was able to conquer fear and anxiety through it. This meant that the quote-unquote weaker sibling finally saved a princess, stopped an outbreak of viruses, and most important of all, he faced his ghosts once again to save his brother. This time, Mario doesn't thank him in jealousy. This time, he even says Luigi is
number one.
Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon is the beginning of a brand new Luigi, now with a paranormal pet pooch. Mario Kart 8 gave us the Luigi Death Stare. But this is more than just a stare, it's a sign that Luigi has been granted more confidence in design. Mario and Luigi Paper Jam is no different, showing that Luigi, while still succumbing to fear at times, knows that he has to be brave and get through it, for the kingdom and for the respect he deserves. Mario may indeed be the true red and blue hero, but Luigi has faced so many setbacks in his life that it could have ended with him back at home waiting for Mario to return. And return, and return, and return. Through childhood trauma, anxiety, depression, an inferiority complex, and terror, Luigi managed to overcome it all, and still saved the kingdom multiple times. Luigi is arguably much braver than Mario in the sense that he actually has known real fear. Luigi truly is number one after all.
How soon is too soon?